Chapter 424. With a burst of dust, the space warship slowly landed on the wasteland. The hatch opened and Quill and the others walked out. They came behind Kale and Lucy and looked at the ruins under the light of the warship. What happened here? Lucy's face was full of horror. She covered her small mouth with one hand to prevent herself from screaming, while her other hand grabbed Kale's arm tightly. Obviously they were attacked by an unknown force. But who would dare to attack Brown Bear and the others who are the VIPs of New Star? Quill was shocked. Kale was also deeply puzzled about this. There were two top forces in the Milky Way Alliance. One was Carrie and the other was New Star. After the incident with Luonan, both of them knew how powerful he was and would never attack the people he protected. As for the interstellar hunters who were scattered like sand, they did not have the capital to challenge Tani and the others. The high-end combat power that stayed here during the day was Iron Man Tani, North Star Lorna, Tree Man Groot and Rocket Bear. They had already surpassed the combat power level of the original Guardian of the Galaxy. These creatures are a bit familiar. Yondu frowned and took a few steps forward. He came to the front of an armored creature and squatted down to size it up. His calm face suddenly changed and he said in a deep voice, "I remember now. It's Titan, the subordinates of that man." Titan? Hearing this name, Kale's eyes turned cold as if he was facing a great enemy. His body and mind tightened and his hands suddenly clenched into fists. Energy arcs faintly intertwined between his fingers. Quill touched his chin and remembered the contents of the Infinity Glove and the gem. He exclaimed, "Could it be Mia Thanos?" Plop. 10 meters in front of everyone, under a pile of rubble, a steel arm with paint peeling off suddenly stretched out. Kale reacted quickly. He took a big stride forward and reached out to grab the hand covered in steel. He pulled up and suddenly, an Iron Man covered in scars and flashing a malfunctioning light was lifted up from the ground. Kale gently placed it on the ground and crushed the broken steel mask, revealing Tani's pale and bloodless face. Teach Godfather. Tani struggled to open his eyes. When he saw that it was Kale, his lifeless eyes lit up. "You're finally back. Tani, tell me what happened here," Kale asked. Tani coughed violently. He supported himself on the ground and struggled to get up. He said with difficulty, "Jarvis, how long have I been unconscious? Where are those people?" Jarvis replied, "Sir, you've been unconscious for nearly 3 hours. The enemy warship has already evacuated the planet 2.5 hours ago." 2.5 hours? It's too late. Tani gritted his teeth and said to Kale, "Godfather, 3 hours ago we were suddenly attacked. The enemy was 2 donut-like interstellar battleships. There were many fully armed alien creatures and soldiers, as well as 2 very powerful aliens. My battle suit was no match for them at all. The battle suit that had always been successful was suddenly ravaged by an unprecedentedly powerful enemy. It failed to protect the people it wanted to protect. This was an extremely cruel blow to Tani as Iron Man." After listening to Tani's words, Kale whispered with certainty, "It seems that it really is Thanos. Kale, look over there." Suddenly Lucy made a sound. Kale and Tani looked in the direction of the prompt and saw that under the ruins not far away, there was a slight bulge. The bulge was still expanding and soon a protective cage wrapped in branches was exposed. The cage of branches, the size of a second floor, had collapsed and opened. There were 3 people lying inside intact. They were Howard, Rocket, and Drax. "Father." Tani exhaled softly. He didn't care about taking off the broken battle suit and ran forward quickly. He was relieved when he found that Howard had just fainted and was fine. Rocket had tears in the corners of his eyes. He held a branch in his paws and his face was sad and deep. He didn't speak. Drax's naked upper body was full of scars. He patted Rocket's little shoulder comfortingly. "Where are the others?" Kale looked around and didn't see Lorna and Gola. Drax clenched his teeth and said gloomily, "Those guys are here for Galmo. Lorna seems to have been taken away as well. Before they left, they even released an interstellar missile to kill us. If it wasn't for Groot saving us. It's dead. Groot is dead. Only this is left." Rocket finally couldn't help but shed 2 lines of tears, dripping on the dry branch in his hand. "This is bad." The bad news that followed made Kale's heart tremble. He didn't expect that such a big change would happen after leaving for just a few hours. Thanos' subordinates had taken Gola away, so they couldn't get any information about the Soul Gem's location. This was something they couldn't talk about for now. On the other hand, Lorna, who had the ability to control magnetic fields, had been taken away. They had lost a high-end combat power. "Mr. Kale, can we go and find that bastard Thanos for revenge?" Rocket looked up and looked at Kale, the only one who had the ability to fight against Thanos. Kale frowned and thought quickly. Then he said in a deep voice, "There are only 3 outcomes if we face Thanos now. First, we and part of Thanos' fleet will both be damaged. Second, you all die and I can escape alive. Third, we will all die in the Titan star system." Thanos is that strong? After hearing Kale's words, Quill couldn't help but feel a chill run down his spine. He knew how terrifying Kale's combat power was. At this moment, even Kale was treating him with unprecedented seriousness. That's right. And now that Thanos has taken Gola away, he might get the Soul Gem soon. With the power of the Infinity Glove, I don't even have the slightest chance of beating him. Kale said bluntly. So we're just going to let it go? Rocket asked in disbelief. Of course, we can't just let it go. Lorna is still in their hands. How dare they attack my people? Kale shook his head decisively and narrowed his eyes dangerously. We need reinforcements strong enough to fight against Thanos' battleships and subordinates. We also need to get the other raw gemstones first. Otherwise, when the rest of the gemstones fall into Thanos' hands, it will be a real cosmic catastrophe. Drax scratched his bald head and asked the key point. How do we know where the other gemstones are? Kale looked at Tani and then at Lucy. What a coincidence, I just happen to know. First of all, excluding the location of the soul gem that Gola knew. Just Kale's main body alone had 2 raw gemstones, the strength and space gemstones. Then the original carrier of the space gemstone, the empty tesseract, was still in the SHLD laboratory on Earth. The time gemstone was kept by Earth's Sorcerer Supreme, Alpha Centauri. The mind gemstone was in the Mind Scepter, which was now in the hands of Thanos. Later, Thanos gave it to Loki and let him invade Earth to plunder the raw gemstones on a large scale. The reality gemstone was related to the Divine Dominion, but now it seemed to be related to Earth. In this way, Thanos also has 2 raw gemstones in his hands, which are the Soul Gemstone and the Mind Gemstone. It's 50-50 with me, and the rest of the raw gemstones are actually related to Earth in some way. Kale's face suddenly changed when he thought of this. Wait a minute. If Thanos attacked Earth first, then he would no longer have any advantage in the fight for the raw gemstones. Chapter 425. At that time, Kale and his crew were still countless light years away in space. At the same time, Earth, New York, is the headquarters. In the SHLD conference room on the top floor, the afternoon sun shone in through the floor-to-ceiling windows. In the bright and spacious conference hall, a few people of different ages and genders sat around a large round table. Sitting on the main seat at the end of the round table was Nick Fry, who was wearing a black trench coat and a one-eyed mask. He had his hands under his chin, and his dark face was cold and slightly ugly. As his right-hand female agent, Hill, was standing beside his seat. Most of the other seats were empty in 2s and 3s. Captain America Steve Rogers, who always wore a blue-striped tight-fitting combat suit, sat on the left side of the round table. On the left side was Falcon Sam Wilson, who carried a mechanical instrument on his back. On the right side was Black Widow Natasha Romanoff, who had beautiful dark red short hair. As for the row on the right side of the conference table, Kale's Superman doppelganger with a human personality, the son of God, Caesar Carl, who looked like a 4 or 5-year-old child. He was lying on his seat like a small bed, and his head was only slightly above the table. He was sucking on a lollipop to absorb the sugar energy, and he muttered in a childish voice, "Do you have soda? Young master, can you be more serious? This is a major conference that concerns the peace of Earth." The bodyguard Eddie Brock, who was sitting on the left side, coughed. He had a beard and looked like a ruffian. He was wearing an ill-fitting black suit, and his serious appearance was slightly comical. On the right side of Caesar was Dr. Bana, whose hair was messy. He was wearing a pair of glasses, looked around at everyone in the room and said weakly, "In this situation, I think it's better for me to continue recuperating, so that the Hulk in my body won't come out and cause trouble." On the left side of the round table, Steve and the other 2 were obviously agents. Like Director Fry, they were all tense and nervous, as if they were facing a formidable enemy. On the right side, Caesar and the other 2 were more like characters who were just there to make up the numbers. Very few people knew that the people on the right side of the round table were the real high-end combat forces left behind on Earth. "Bring me a bottle of Coke," Fry whispered to someone behind him. Hill nodded helplessly and left the meeting room. "Fry, I still can't believe that Barton suddenly betrayed us." Natasha raised her beautiful eyes and stared straight at Fry. "I can't believe it either, but it's the truth." Fry shrugged and said in a deep voice, "Just half an hour ago, A man with a pair of horns on his head called himself Loki. He said that he came from the divine domain and took away the tesseract that the divine shield underground base had been keeping. At that time the director was at the scene. When our agents were about to counterattack, Agent Hawkeye suddenly pulled out an arrow and shot at the SHALD security personnel. At the same time, he helped the Elysian with the magic staff escape with the tesseract from the underground base. Agent Hill walked back into the hall and finished speaking for Fry. She placed a bottle of iced Coke on Caesar's table. Thanks. Caesar didn't seem to be afraid of the cold. He picked up the iced Coke with his small hands and opened the lid. When he heard the name Loki, a flash of realization flashed through his gem-like blue eyes. It turned out that a certain god's younger brother had come. Fry nodded and said sternly, "That's right. Whether Agent Barton was forced by personal circumstances or was controlled by someone else, we don't know, but we still have to put him on the wanted list." Okay. Natasha frowned, looking a little indignant and worried. She and Barton were close friends. Naturally, she didn't believe that he would betray them, not to mention that he was loyal to someone from the divine domain. In other words, a so-called god has come to our New York City? Steve's tone was rather strange. He didn't expect that after 70 years of being frozen, the outside world would change and a mythical god would appear. They're called gods, but they're just aliens who have lived for a long time and have some extraordinary talents. A few years ago there was also a god who came to Earth. Later he went back with a hammer. Fry paused as if he had remembered something. He said inexplicably, "Many years ago I knew that we were alone. I know that we humans are not alone. There are many alien races and civilizations in the universe. When Kale returned to Earth he also said that one day we would face those aliens and even start a war with them to snatch resources. Perhaps that day is now." Fry glanced at everyone at the round table and said seriously, "This is the meaning of the creation of the Avengers. The real first battle of the Avengers inevitably made the heroes on the scene excited. But, ton, the strange sound made the faces of everyone in the hall stiffen, and they all looked at Caesar. He was holding the bottle with both hands, looking up and gulping down Coke. Caesar's small stomach was like a bottomless pit. No matter how much he drank, his stomach didn't show any signs of swelling. "Young master, pay attention to the situation." Eddie patted his head and was speechless. When Caesar finished drinking, he threw the bottle away and touched his stomach. His body suddenly floated from the chair and said, "That's it? Okay, I'll go find Loki now and beat him up. I'll also take the tesseract back. Eddie, let's go." Caesar didn't forget to beckon Eddie with his finger. Eddie sighed, got up from his seat and reached out his left hand to Caesar. Caesar grabbed two of the fingers and pulled Eddie, who was 3 to 4 times bigger than him, out of the hall on the top floor, which was hundreds of meters high. He opened the floor-to-ceiling window and flew out. Under the acceleration, the two quickly disappeared from everyone's sight. In the conference hall of the original Divine Shield, the remaining people were in a mess due to the strong wind from the high altitude. "This is really like Kale's style." Steve smiled. "Captain, I can't believe you can still smile." Sam stared at him and said bitterly, "If we let that violent son of God do whatever he wants, things might get worse." "Don't worry, young master knows what he's doing," Natasha comforted. "Besides, Eddie is beside him." "What? Eddie and the symbiotic demon in his body also go crazy?" Sam asked a question that no one in the room could answer. Dr. Bana raised his hand and asked weakly, "How about I stop the fight?" "Fry, it's over. New York is going to suffer. This is a real fight between monsters." Sam shrunk his neck and felt a chill down his spine. Steve stood up and put his hands on the table. "Okay, we can't just stand by and watch. Let's go now. Our goal is to capture Loki and Agent Hawkeye. And the tesseract, don't forget," Fry added. Fury added. Then he ordered Hill, who was behind him, "Just in case, you can activate that thing now." "Yes." Hill immediately understood what Fry was referring to and nodded solemnly to accept the order. Chapter 426. After nightfall, the bustling streets of New York City turned on their lights. The light sources gathered together, illuminating the dark night sky. Caesar, wearing a t-shirt with an Iron Man pattern and casual cropped pants, stood at the top of the Empire State Building in the cold night wind. With a lollipop in his mouth, he looked down at the panoramic view of New York City. Eddie stood beside him, shivering in the night wind. He wrapped his suit jacket around himself and wondered, "Young master, how long are we going to stand here?" "Until Loki shows up," Caesar said matter-of-factly. "Then why don't we take the initiative to look for him like Captain America?" Eddie complained. How can we take the initiative to look for him? Caesar smiled. A cunning villain like Loki who is proficient in all kinds of divine spells, and now has the tesseract that can travel through space. As long as he doesn't want to show up, even if we turn New York or even Earth upside down, we still won't be able to find him. I understand. Eddie twitched the corner of his mouth and said helplessly, then if he doesn't come out or returns to the divine realm, won't we have to wait here for the whole night? Don't worry about that. A bright smile appeared on Caesar's small face as he said with certainty, Loki is an evil god in Norse mythology. With his ambitious nature, how could he leave Earth so decisively just to get the tesseract? Seeing Caesar's devilish smile, Eddie felt even colder. He muttered in a low voice, why do I feel that you know Loki better than he does? Caesar pretended not to hear him and smiled without saying anything. After all, he was a man who had read the script. With Loki's personality, he could only be regarded as a little villain. Sooner or later he would become a cute old boy. Speaking of which, the Bifrost in Thor's divine realm had been repaired for too long. Eddie suddenly frowned when he heard the warning of the poison in his body. He looked down the street and saw a row of police cars with flashing sirens rushing toward a certain street at the end of his sight. Looks like there's a situation. Caesar bit the candy in his mouth, flicked the stick away and then gently closed his blue eyes. Eddie was already used to this. He stopped talking and let Caesar use his superhuman hearing to his heart's content. In the strong wind hundreds of meters high in the sky, there were many waves of voices. Master, how do I get to Iowa Road? Thank you for your patronage. Here's your change, please keep it. Mom? I want to listen to fairy tales before bed tonight. It's finally off work, overtime is really annoying. Walla 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 walla. From the entire center of New York City, there were all kinds of complicated and dense conversations including car horns, electronic audio, underground water, and so on. All the sounds were like a stream without missing anything. They all flowed into Caesar's mind. After a few years of adaptation, Caesar could now easily accommodate these collected voices, and through his superhuman awareness and reaction, he could filter out the information he wanted to get. I'm a god from the great divine realm. You weak natives on Earth must all submit to me. This was extremely arrogant, with a bit of a Chinibu tone. It couldn't be wrong. Caesar suddenly opened his eyes and looked 10 kilometers to the left. He said indifferently, found him, Loki is now in the New York Cathedral. Then what are you waiting for? Eddie suddenly took off his suit jacket, leaving only a long-sleeved white shirt, revealing his seemingly thin but strong body. A little black liquid gushed out of his body and wriggled consciously. It began to act as a defensive coat on the surface of his body. God, is it? I really want to have a good meeting with him. The symbiotic body itself was violent, wild, and evil. Eddie, who had lived with the poison for several years, had been assimilated more than a little. At this time, under the grand chandelier of the New York Cathedral, the tourists from all over the world and the locals of New York were all standing there in a daze. Their bewildered gazes were focused on the door of the church. A mysterious man in golden armor, a golden cape, and an amethyst staff was walking down the spacious steps that had been separated by the crowd. What are you? Pretending to be mysterious? A big man with an indignant face outside the door shouted at the mysterious man, but before he could finish, the man raised his staff and a blue light beam suddenly blasted the big man, blowing him into nothingness on the spot. Murder. Ah. In the square of the New York Cathedral, hundreds of thousands of people witnessed this terrible scene. Many of them cried out in horror and were about to cause a commotion and escape. Loki smiled evilly and used an illusion spell. Immediately, 3 or 4 clones appeared at the corners of the street, blocking the escape route of the people. A large group of people was surrounded by Loki and the god in the square. Beep, beep. A police car with a flashing siren drove outside, but Loki only raised his hand slightly. Again, a light beam shot out from his staff like a cannonball, overturning the moving police car 180 degrees to the ground. The people couldn't help but cry out in shock. As soon as the sound rose, it was interrupted by a voice. Kneel. Kneel. 4 or 5 Lokis repeated the words and raised their staffs, radiating divine power. Their handsome faces were full of evilness. Thousands of people were immediately stunned. They kept quiet out of fear and didn't dare to move. Under the coercion of an unknown force, the first person knelt down in fear and soon the second, the third, and so on. In less than 5 seconds, thousands of people in the square knelt on the ground. In the square, only Loki stood with his head held high. That's more like it. With his doppelganger as a guard, Loki's main body held a staff and paced among the kneeling crowd. He smiled and said, "You humans are born like this. Freedom and happiness bind you. You desire to be enslaved. This is the truth of the universe. You crazily pursue power and status, but in fact, deep in your bones, there is a deep-rooted servility. Sooner or later you will succumb to your ruler." As soon as Loki finished speaking, his face suddenly froze. In the square of the church, there was a stone statue of a young man holding a sword, looking down at him. "I hate that person's statue. Sooner or later my statue will fill every city in the world." Blue veins bulged on Loki's forehead. He raised the staff. As the blue light accumulated, he didn't care about the people below the stone statue and was about to smash the symbol of peace into pieces. Whoosh! The blue light beam shot toward the statue of peace. At this critical moment, a small figure suddenly jumped from the sky and slapped the magic light beam back. The returning light beam knocked Loki to the ground. The blond boy stood firmly on the ground. He supported the foot of the stone statue with one hand and put the other hand in his trouser pocket. Looking at Loki on the ground, he murmured, "Well, if you have something to say, we can talk about it. Don't do anything to this stone statue. It didn't do anything to you. It's the divine son. Little Superman." The people in the square were also stunned, and then burst into cheers of joy. Chapter 427. That Superman is Superman. Can you remove the word little? Looking at the cheering people around him, Caesar was a little speechless. Seeing Loki get up from the ground, he quickly added, "Also, if you can leave here, I'll be even happier." The people smiled knowingly, then quickly stood up from the ground and fled in all directions. Soon they vacated the open space in front of the New York Cathedral. "A child?" Loki stood up with his staff and looked at Caesar with a little confusion. Before he could be surprised that even a child could take a spell attack on Earth, a huge black shadow suddenly fell from above his head. "God, right? Take my foot." His feet covered with dark muscles quickly stepped down. Loki hurriedly grabbed the staff with both hands and raised it. The moment his big foot landed on the staff, a blue light rippled out like a wave. The physical attacks unleashed by the super-strong force were in no way inferior to all kinds of fancy and mysterious spells. Loki groaned in pain, but he did not remove the strength. The floor under his feet burst open inch by inch. He looked up coldly and saw that the one stepping on the staff was a tall and burly dark humanoid monster. Eddie's emotionless white eyes reflected Loki. His bloody mouth full of fangs opened, his long tongue with saliva kept swinging, and he let out a hoarse whisper with a grin. "I really don't know what the head of God will taste like." "You lowly creatures." Loki gritted his teeth and supported himself. Suddenly he felt a gust of wind in front of him. Caesar had come to the front of him. His feet were suspended in the air, and his right hand was clenched into a small fist. He punched Loki's defenseless lower abdomen. It seemed to be a casual punch, but Loki felt that there was a force of 10,000 pounds, and it exploded on his lower abdomen. He seemed to have been hit by a high-speed train, and he flew toward the steps of the cathedral behind him. His back dragged the fluttering golden cloak and plowed a deep ditch on the floor. What's the point of saying so much to him? If we don't beat him up, he won't learn his lesson. "Eddie, keep going, we're a mixed pair." Caesar patted the dust off his small hands and said to Eddie, who had fallen to the ground. "All right." Eddie grinned. While Loki's body was still stuck in the steps, it stepped on the floor and jumped over. Its body created a small hurricane. It opened its big hand and grabbed Loki in its hand. It pressed him against the ground and continued to rub violently. It did not give the staff a chance to exert its power at all. "Loki, don't you want to fight seriously?" Caesar pouted and felt bored. He leaped onto the stone statue that symbolized peace on the side and sat on the head of the 3-meter-high statue to watch the show quietly. Boom, boom. At the steps at the entrance of the church, the ground collapsed during the fight. Dust filled the square and the battle became one-sided. Eddie's hoarse roar and Loki's screams rose one after another. Loki didn't forget to repeat, "Don't hit my face." Whoosh! A Aegis fighter jet, which was in stealth mode, appeared at a low altitude of about 30 meters near the church square. The pilot inside, Natasha, stared at the battle below in a daze. Obviously, she was still confused about what had happened. The hatch on the left side opened, and a tall and strong figure jumped out of the fighter decisively. He landed on the ground and immediately did a tactical roll. With the 5-star round shield on his left hand, he landed safely in an almost perfect posture. Caesar turned around and looked at the man in a tight striped battle suit holding a shield. He said casually, "Captain, I'm sorry, I didn't give you a chance to give a speech." "That's okay. Captain America shrugged and glanced at the battle at the entrance of the church. He asked, "Has the target prisoner been controlled?" "For now, yes. But if you had come a little later, maybe Eddie would have bitten off Loki's head on a whim." Caesar smiled like a devil. After he finished speaking, a figure was suddenly thrown out of the battle and rolled to Steve's feet. Steve looked at the ground. It was Loki who had been thrown out. At this time, Loki's hair was in a mess, and he couldn't even maintain his golden armor. He was lying on the ground with his face facing the sky, twitching slightly. Loki saw Steve and squeezed out a row of white teeth. He sighed and said, "An American soldier? An outdated person. Hurry up and arrest me. I've had enough of that big black guy. If you continue to resist, not only will you have to face the big black guy but also the big green guy." Steve's face was cold. He picked up the shackles and locked Loki's hands behind his back according to the procedure. "It's over so quickly? It's really boring." In the dust cloud, Eddie held the amethyst staff and walked out step by step. The huge and burly monster figure gradually shrank. When he walked out, he had returned to his original human form. Eddie looked at Caesar. After Caesar nodded, he took the initiative to hand the staff to Steve. Steve held Loki with one hand and took the staff with the other. He said to Caesar and Eddie, "I'm going to take him to the temporary base and lock him up there. You guys come with me." "I have no problem." Caesar spread his hands and jumped down from the statue. He knew that the farce had just begun. Eddie was more straightforward. He walked behind Caesar and said casually, "Wherever the young master goes, I will go." "Okay, let's go." Steve spoke into the walkie-talkie. The Aegis mech slowly landed on the square. The deck at the back opened downwards. He held Loki and walked to the front. Caesar floated and followed closely behind. Eddie loyally walked at the back. No one noticed that Eddie looked at the backs of the crowd. A cold black light flashed in his eyes. Half a minute later, the Aegis mech started, leaving behind a mess in New York's Church Square. The wings spread out and swept through the clouds. The mech rose to a height of 10,000 meters. New York City below shrank into spots of light. Inside the cabin, Natasha was controlling the mech from the main pilot's seat. Loki, who had taken off his golden armor, sat in the corner of the deck with an innocent face. Steve, Caesar, and Eddie surrounded him and looked at him up and down. "He's called a god, but he's no different from a human," Eddie muttered. "Something's not quite right." Steve looked at Loki, who had been successfully captured. Instead, he frowned slightly. Natasha had her back to the crowd. She agreed. "That's right. That man is very cunning. Also, Baki did not act with him." Steve looked at Caesar. He did not see him as a child. Instead, he saw him as a mature member of SHELD. He said in surprise, "He's very powerful. It shouldn't be so easy. I understand what you mean." Caesar nodded and said straightforwardly, "Even if he can't beat Eddie, he can still escape safely. He won't fall into our hands so easily." Loki heard everyone's doubts and suspicions. He blinked helplessly and said, Hey, you guys are overestimating me. That kid named Caesar, that punch of yours almost made my bile come out of my mouth. And that big black guy just now. He's very violent. You're considered a first-class beast in the universe." "I think we should seal his mouth," Eddie suggested. "Good idea." Steve seemed to accept this suggestion. He was about to look for tape to seal his mouth. Suddenly, with a violent tremor in the cabin, lightning flashed and thunder roared outside the windshield. Thunder and lightning intertwined and raged on the top of the mech. Loki originally looked relaxed and happy. However, after the thunder appeared, his face immediately stiffened and his body could not help but tremble slightly. "Captain, someone's coming?" Caesar seemed to have sensed something and looked up at the top of the mech's cabin. His blue eyes looked through the steel plate and saw a man in a cloak descending from the sky in the storm of thunder and lightning on the mech's hull. He ignored the strong wind and the oxygen-free environment and stood on the mech. In the end, the Rainbow Bridge was fixed. Chapter 428. That Superman is Superman. Can you remove the word little? Caesar was speechless as he looked at the people around him who were cheering. When he saw Rocky getting up from the ground, he quickly added, "Also, I'll be even happier if you guys can leave this place." The people smiled knowingly and quickly stood up from the ground. They scattered and fled outside, quickly vacating an empty space in front of the New York Cathedral. "A child?" Loki stood up with the staff in his hand and looked at Caesar inexplicably. Before he had time to be surprised that even a child on Earth could take a spell attack, a huge black shadow suddenly fell from the top of his head. "God, right? It might kick." The feet that were covered with the dark muscles stomped down quickly. Rocky grabbed the staff with both hands and lifted it up in a hurry. The moment the big foot landed on the staff, a blue light rippled out like a wave. The physical attack that erupted from the super-strong force was not the least bit inferior to all kinds of fancy and mysterious spells. Rocky groaned in pain, but he did not reduce the force. The floor under his feet cracked inch by inch. He looked up coldly and saw a tall and burly dark humanoid monster stepping on the staff. Eddie's emotionless white eyes reflected Rocky. He opened his bloody mouth that was full of fangs, and his long tongue was swaying continuously with saliva. He let out a hoarse laugh and whispered, "I really don't know what the head of God tastes like." "You lowly creatures." Rocky clenched his teeth and held on. Suddenly he felt a gust of wind blowing in front of him. Caesar had already arrived in front of him. Caesar floated in the air with his feet off the ground. He clenched his right hand into a small fist and threw a straight punch at Rocky's unguarded lower abdomen. It seemed to be just a casual punch, but Rocky felt a tremendous force exploding on his lower abdomen. It was as if he had been hit by a high-speed train. He flew toward the steps of the church behind him, dragging the golden cloak behind him and plowing a slightly deep ditch on the floor. "Why are you talking so much to him? If you don't beat him up, he will not learn his lesson. Eddie, keep going. This is a mixed double fight." Caesar dusted off the dust on his small hands and said to Eddie, who was in his symbiotic form, "Okay." Eddie grinned. While Rocky's body was still stuck in the steps, he stepped on the floor and leaped over. His body created a small-scale hurricane. He opened his big hands and grabbed Rocky, pressing him under the ground and continuing to rub him violently. He did not give the magic staff a chance to exert its power at all. "Rocky, don't you want to fight seriously?" Caesar said. Feeling bored, he lightly jumped onto the stone statue that symbolized peace at the side and sat on the head of the 3-meter-tall statue to quietly watch the show. Boom, boom, boom. At the steps of the church entrance, the ground collapsed during the fight. Dust filled the square, and the battle became a one-sided trampling. Eddie's hoarse roar and Rocky's screams were heard one after another. Rocky did not forget to repeat, "Don't hit my face." Swoosh. A shield fighter in stealth mode appeared at a low altitude of about 30 meters near the church square. The pilot, Natasha, stared blankly at the battle below. Obviously she did not know what was going on. The hatch on the left opened, and a tall and strong figure jumped out of the fighter decisively. He landed on the ground and immediately did a tactical roll. With the 5-star round shield on his left hand, he landed safely in an almost perfect posture. Caesar turned around and looked at the man who was wearing a tight-fitting striped battle suit with a shield. He said carelessly and childishly, "Captain, I'm sorry, I didn't give you a chance to give a speech." "It's okay." Captain America shrugged, glanced at the battle at the entrance of the church and asked, "Is the target prisoner under control?" "For the time being, but if you had come a little later, maybe Eddie would have bitten off Loki's head on a whim." Caesar smiled like a demon. After he finished speaking, a figure was suddenly thrown out of the battle and rolled to Steve's feet. Steve looked at the ground. It was Loki who was thrown out. At this time, Loki's hair was messy, and he could not maintain the golden armor. He was lying on the ground with his face up, twitching slightly. When Loki saw Steve, he squeezed out a row of white teeth and sighed, "An American soldier? An outdated person. Hurry up and arrest me. I've had enough of that big black guy. If you continue to resist, not only that big black guy but you also have to face a big green guy." Steve's face was cold. He picked up the shackles and locked Loki's hands behind his back according to the procedure. "It's over so soon? It's really boring." In the dust, Eddie held the amethyst staff and stepped out step by step. The huge and burly monster figure gradually shrank. When he walked out, he had returned to his original human form. Eddie looked at Caesar, and after Caesar nodded, he took the initiative to hand the staff to Steve. Steve held Loki in one hand and took the staff with the other. He said to Caesar and Eddie, "I'm going to take him to the temporary base and lock him up there. You guys come with me." "No problem." Caesar spread his hands and jumped down from the statue. He knew that this farce had just begun. Eddie was even more straightforward. He walked behind Caesar and said casually, "I'll go wherever the young master goes." "All right, let's go." Steve spoke into the walkie-talkie. The shield mech slowly landed on the square. The deck of the rear cabin door opened downwards. He held Loki and walked to the front. Caesar floated and followed closely behind. Eddie walked faithfully at the back. No one noticed that Eddie was looking at the backs of the crowd. A cold black light flashed in his eyes. Half a minute later, The shield mech started up, leaving behind a mess in New York's Cathedral Square. The spread wings swept through the clouds. The mech rose to an altitude of 10,000 meters. New York City below shrunk into spots of light. Inside the cabin, Natasha was piloting the mech from the main pilot's seat. Loki, who had taken off his golden armor, sat in the corner of the deck with an innocent look on his face. Steve, Caesar, and Eddie surrounded him, sizing him up. "He's called a god, but he's no different from a human being," Eddie muttered. "Something's not quite right." Steve looked at Loki, who had been successfully captured. He frowned slightly. Natasha, who had her back to the crowd, added, "That's right. That man is very cunning. Also, Bucky did not act with him." Steve looked at Caesar. He did not see him as a child. Instead, he saw him as a mature SHIELD member. He said in surprise, "He's very powerful. It shouldn't be so easy. I understand what you mean." Caesar nodded and said straightforwardly, "Even if he can't beat Eddie, he can still get away safely. He won't fall into our hands so easily." Loki heard everyone's doubts and suspicions. He blinked helplessly and said, Hey, you guys overestimate me. That kid named Caesar, that punch of yours almost made my bile run up my throat. And that big black guy just now, he's very violent. You're also a first-class beast in the universe." "I think we should seal his mouth," Eddie suggested. "Good idea." Steve seemed to really accept this suggestion and was about to find a sealing tape. Suddenly, with a violent tremor in the cabin, lightning flashed and thunder rumbled outside the fighter's windshield. Thunder and lightning intertwined and raged on the top of the fighter. Loki originally looked relaxed and happy, but after the thunder appeared, his face immediately stiffened and his body couldn't help but tremble slightly. "Captain, someone is coming." Caesar seemed to have sensed something and raised his head to look at the top of the cabin of the fighter. His blue eyes looked through the steel plate and saw a man wearing armor and a cloak descending from the sky amidst the storm and lightning on the outer shell of the fighter. He ignored the strong wind and the anaerobic environment and stood on the fighter. The Bifrost was finally repaired. Chapter 429. The high seas area outside North America, the hinterland of the Pacific Ocean. The Aegis mech flew out from the inland. After reaching the ocean area, it gradually lowered its sailing altitude and speed. It was as if it had always had a destination and did not deviate from the sailing direction at all. Current altitude, 5,000 meters, 3,000 meters, 1,000 meters, 500 meters. Low altitude warning. The warning light flickered and the warning sound in the cabin kept ringing. Natasha skillfully piloted the mech and descended towards the sea level that reflected the sparkling golden sunlight. "That, Miss Natasha, right? The temporary base of S.H.L.D. that you mentioned is in the sea below?" Eddie leaned against the pilot's seat and asked doubtfully. He looked down through the windshield and saw the blue waves on the sea below. On the vast and boundless sea, other than the seawater and schools of fish that jumped out from time to time, there was no trace of an island or a ship. Natasha's lips curled into a smile, but she did not give a relevant answer. She only focused on piloting the mech. The speed and altitude of the mech continued to decrease. Soon it was less than 100 meters away from the sea level. Caesar coughed and said like an old man, "Eddie, don't embarrass me. Just watch carefully." "All right." Eddie asked for a snub and watched with his eyes wide open. He wanted to see how a temporary base of S.H.L.D. could be created out of thin air. Captain America Steve and Thor were still in the aft cabin, staring at the handcuffed Loki. In front of him, they had been discussing how to deal with the series of crimes that Loki had committed on Earth. "We're almost there. Sit tight. Don't be so scared that you'll pee your pants," Natasha teased Eddie. Her 5 fingers bounced nimbly on the virtual panel, and then she pulled back the thrusters on the pilot's control panel. The Aegis mech treated the sea below as the ground, and the engine power was turned off one by one to land. "This is..." Eddie's eyes widened in surprise. He saw that the originally calm sea below suddenly had a turbulent white wave within a radius of 1 kilometer. In an instant, several whirlpools of different sizes were formed. Then the water surface rose layer by layer. From the bottom of the sea, an island-like steel fortress emerged with a rumble. A flat and wide airstrip, countless black holes for cannons, and 4 giant engines that looked like Ferris wheels underneath. What appeared in front of him was Earth's current top technological creation. Along with the fierce splashing of the waves, the seawater flowed out, quickly revealing the full appearance of the steel fortress. It was a super-large aircraft carrier. Not only was Eddie shocked by this spectacular scene, but even Steve and the other 2 were surprised. On the contrary, Caesar was the one who was most used to it. There were originally 3 Aegis aircraft carriers. One was destroyed when the spies of the Hydra organization were eliminated. The remaining 2 were all occupied by the original Kale. However, 3 years ago, Fry came to Kale with a thick skin and asked for one of the aircraft carriers back as a secret weapon for us, in an emergency. The Aegis mech descended and floated up from the deep sea with the aircraft carrier. It just touched the ground and landed on the deck with some seawater left. Some of the cabin doors of the aircraft carrier opened, and many engineering vehicles and agents appeared on the deck one after another. They immediately entered the waiting work after the aircraft carrier floated to the sea. And led by Director Fry, a group of agents followed behind and came to the Aegis mech swiftly. The cabin door of the aircraft opened. Caesar and Eddie walked in front, and the 2 were still looking at everything around them idly. Steve and Thor followed closely behind, one on the left and one on the right, escorting Loki down the aircraft. Oh, to be honest, I'm very happy to see the gods of Norse mythology. Fry looked at Thor, then looked at Loki and said lightly, but I still have to say, Earth does not welcome you. Unless you're here for peace. Loki smiled and said stubbornly, sorry, I'm your future ruler. Shut up. Thor coldly scolded Loki, and together with Steve, the 2 of them almost carried Loki down with their hands. Where's the Tesseract? Fry asked Natasha, who was the last to get off the aircraft and was holding an amethyst staff. Loki didn't bring the Tesseract with him and Barton didn't follow him, Natasha replied. Fry said with a heavy face, of course Barton didn't follow him. Just an hour ago Barton took away a group of SHLDS underground scientists, and also sneaked into some of the sub-bases to steal pyrolite, Ku, and other meteorite metals. Natasha looked at Loki's back and said seriously, Loki is controlling Barton, could it be that he wants to secretly use the Tesseract to do something? In short, while guarding Loki, we need to find the whereabouts of the Tesseract as soon as possible. After saying that, Fry looked at Caesar and said with a rare warmth on his serious face, Caesar, I'll have to trouble you to stay here for a while in case something happens that we can't handle. Sure, let's find a place to eat, I'm hungry. Caesar casually agreed if he left now, he wouldn't be able to see Loki's show later. Now that you mention it, I'm hungry too. Eddie held his stomach and grinned. Fry and Natasha were speechless. This is an alien invasion that concerns the safety of Earth. Only Caesar and Eddie, master and servant, can be so careless and only want to fill their stomachs. But there's no other way. Caesar and Eddie are now the 2 most stable high-end combat power in the Avengers. Thor is still unreliable for the time being. After all, he hasn't fully joined the alliance, and the enemy is his brother Loki. No one knows if he will be soft-hearted and show mercy. Helicarrier main cockpit. After locking Loki in a small dark room, Fry led the Avengers to the main cockpit, where they can overlook the spectacular scene on the deck of the aircraft carrier through the windshield. All the equipment in the hall is the most advanced of the modern era. The computer screen is replaced by a holographic virtual screen. Even the experienced and knowledgeable Dr. Bana was amazed when he entered the advanced inner cabin of the helicarrier, not to mention Steve, a veteran who has been frozen for 70 years, can't take his eyes off it. Only Caesar and Eddie were sitting in a corner, eating hot food with their heads buried in their mouths. They did not fit in with the other agents and workers who were busy with their work. Are you ready? Fury stood on a platform and glanced at the staff in the hall. His face was solemn as he said in a deep voice. The people on the deck have been evacuated. The 4 engines have been checked. The system data is all normal, over. The elite staff in the hall are controlling the projection screen and responding one after another. Very good, let's officially take off. Fry waved his hand. Rumble. The aircraft carrier trembled violently. Caesar was already prepared. He held a plate with food in his hands and floated in the air. Eddie, who was eating spaghetti, was caught off guard and fell forward. Half of his face was stained with spaghetti sauce. What the hell is going on? Diving again? Or the sky? Eddie picked up a tissue and wiped his face. When he glanced outside, he saw the aircraft carrier quickly leaving the sea and rising into the sky. He couldn't help but open his mouth in horror. Damn, it's really going to the sky. Chapter 430. After ascending to a height of more than 10,000 meters, the dark clouds below covered the ground, and the aircraft carrier was bathed in the bright sunlight forever. On the side of the main cockpit hall, there was a well-equipped research room. The amethyst staff was placed on one of the workbenches, and Dr. Bana was carrying out phrase instructions to track and search the light particles of the Tesseract. In addition to the staff who were assisting, All the members of the Avengers were transferred to this room. Through the surveillance video here, they could know everything that happened in the cockpit and the captivity room. At this time, Loki was being held in the captivity room, in a huge glass trough in the center of the room. Fry stood outside the closed glass door and looked at Loki through the 10-centimeter thick bulletproof glass. Frey's face was cold. He looked at Loki and said in a deep voice, "I advise you not to try to break this glass cage, otherwise, you will fall down together with this cage from a height of 10,000 meters. This cage is not specially made for me, right?" Loki smiled evilly and said while holding the inner wall of the glass with both hands, "Of course there are monsters on Earth that are much fiercer than you." Fry said indifferently with an expressionless face. Loki looked around and showed a look of realization. He said sarcastically, "I know. An angry green monster, you want to use a monster born for destruction to save the world? Don't you think you are too naive and funny? You who want to occupy Earth are the most naive and funny." Fry was unmoved. After finishing his speech, he turned and left the captivity room, leaving Loki alone in the cage. Loki raised his head and looked at the camera in the corner, showing a strange and inexplicable smile. In the research room, Natasha turned off the surveillance screen that was fixed on Loki's face and looked at the other members of the Avengers. She frowned and said, "He is too cunning. He was caught alone in the church. He must be hiding some secret conspiracy." "That, he just mentioned a green monster. Do we really have those things on the aircraft carrier?" Eddie raised his hand and asked in surprise. Everyone in the research room looked at him with a strange expression. Caesar was slightly embarrassed and secretly touched his forehead. But it was true. Eddie's identity was just Caesar's bodyguard. He wasn't even a member of the Avengers. Before he fused with the poison, he had never heard of the Avengers or Hulk. He had always been carrying out missions according to Family Cal's instructions. Steve and Natasha looked at each other. He touched his chin and looked at Dr. Bana. How should I explain this? After all, I've only heard about it. I haven't seen the real face of the darkness. I don't care." On the other hand, Dr. Bana seemed very casual. While operating the equipment, he explained, "A few years ago I was exposed to gamma-ray radiation in the workshop, and the genes in my body mutated. Once I lose control of my emotions, I will turn into a green monster. I was the one who caused the earthquake in New York's Harmon Crew district to collapse." Impressive. Eddie opened his mouth in surprise. As a graduate of the journalism major, he was very familiar with the reports from a few years ago. He just didn't know that there were many shocking inside stories hidden in them. Eddie suddenly spread his hands and complained, "Dr. Bana, the two of us are in the same situation. You have an angry beast in your body, and I have a master who is difficult to serve in my body." Dr. Bana smiled gently like an ordinary scientist. Not to mention the workers at SHLD. Even the members of the Avengers, Steve and Natasha, kept a safe distance from him to avoid accidentally angering the green beast in his body. At this moment, a figure suddenly climbed onto Dr. Bana's shoulder and wrapped his arms around his neck. Steve and the others at the side all changed color. "Young master, what are you doing?" Eddie was shocked. He hurriedly stood up and stared at Caesar, who was hanging on Dr. Bana's body. "Caesar, come down quickly." Steve subconsciously picked up his round shield, and Natasha also touched the pistol at her waist. Her body and mind were extremely tense. They were afraid that Dr. Bana would be stimulated and transform into Hulk and tear down the aircraft carrier. Caesar acted as if he didn't hear it. His hands were hanging on Dr. Bana's body, and he swung back and forth. "Okay, don't get too excited." Dr. Bana raised his hands and dissuaded the nervous people. He glanced at Caesar behind him and said, "Don't worry, as long as Caesar is here, no matter what, Hulk will never come out." "Why does Hulk like children?" Steve put down his round shield and asked in surprise. Dr. Bana said inexplicably, "I'm not too sure, but this is my intuition. Hulk may have recognized the aura of that person on Caesar, so he doesn't want to come out." When that person was mentioned, everyone suddenly understood. The symbol of peace, Kale, although he was not on Earth, he was affecting this world every moment. Hulk had been beaten up by Kale and was fiercely barbecued. That feeling was probably unforgettable for the rest of his life. Caesar smiled and said in a childish voice, "Dr. Bana, have you ever thought that such a strong gamma ray should have killed you in the workshop, but in the end you still managed to survive?" Hearing the words behind his ear, Dr. Bana was stunned and said to himself thoughtfully, "Little Caesar, do you mean that the other me, Hulk, saved my life? Have you ever thought that maybe Hulk is not a side effect?" Caesar dropped this sentence and jumped off Dr. Bana's shoulder. He sat on the workbench and leaned on the crystal staff that emitted a purple-blue luster. Then what is the meaning of Hulk's existence? Dr. Bana shook his head gently, expelled the chaotic thoughts in his mind, and threw himself into the work of looking for the magic cube. By the way, Thor, right? Natasha looked at the hammer-wielding man who was also silent in the room and said, I heard that Loki is your brother, what do you think? I only know that he is burning with hatred now. Thor clenched the hammer and looked up. Also, Loki now has an alien army in his hands. If he wants to occupy Earth, he will definitely ask for the help of the alien army. When Dr. Bana heard this information, he suddenly thought of something and frowned. We seem to have missed an important clue. Just now, Director Fry mentioned that the rebel Bart stole metals like pyrolite. Everyone here, does anyone know what pyrolite is used for? Pyrolite? Steve, Natasha, Thor, and Eddie looked at each other. After Iron Man Tani left Earth, except for Dr. Bana, the rest seemed to be bad at science. It's so simple, don't you know? Pyrolite, a meteorite material from outer space, can create antiparticles and act as a space stabilizer. This way the new portal will not collapse at will and can be more durable and expand. A young voice broke the dead silence in the room. Everyone looked at the workbench and saw Caesar with his hands crossed in front of his chest and said, with the magic cube and pyrolite, as long as there is a high-density power source, we can create a big enough interstellar portal. Frey's female assistant, Gil, just walked into the room and heard Caesar's explanation. She couldn't help but be surprised. When did you learn the knowledge of thermonuclear astrophysics? Before Caesar could answer, Eddie shrugged and explained helplessly, Young Master studied all the majors above graduate level on Earth a year ago, and also rejected a series of lectures and seminars from famous schools such as Harvard and MIT. Chapter 431. Looking at everyone's surprised eyes, Caesar remained calm. He even took it for granted. After all, Kale had already mastered these knowledge and skills by drawing cards. Naturally, his doppelganger could not hold him back. In the past 3 years, Caesar had not only worked hard to control his superhuman strength and awaken various superpowers, but he had also spent a lot of time learning the only knowledge and skills on Earth with his superhuman intelligence. For the Kryptonians, it was far from enough to describe them as having a photographic memory. Their brains were comparable to the system processor of a supercomputer. The speed at which they absorbed knowledge and skills was no less than the speed at which they absorbed natural energy. On the other hand, learning and training made it easier for Caesar to calm down and gradually find the trick to controlling the enormous energy and power in his body. Create a big enough interstellar portal? Dr. Bana was quick to understand. When he heard this, he almost blurted out, So, Loki wants to activate the Tesseract and transfer his alien army from outer space to Earth? Thor immediately nodded and said in a low voice, It's very possible. This is very much like Loki's style. What did you just say? Steve and Natasha were still confused. They did not understand the scientific theory at all. They only knew that Loki was secretly building a portal. Captain. Dr. Banner looked at Steve and said solemnly, Agent Barton, who is controlled by Loki, is still short of a high-density power source, which is enough to activate the Tesseract in their hands and tear a hole in space. This will be a doomsday catastrophe for Earth. Is there not much time left for us? Steve frowned and spread his hands. He sighed and said, Well, now I have a question. Where can Loki find the high-density power source? The heroes who thought they were bad students shut their mouths and looked at Dr. Bana and the 4-year-old Caesar. High-density power source, Dr. Bana muttered softly. Suddenly, he remembered something and eagerly looked at Caesar on the workbench. Stark Industries? You're right, Dr. Bana. Caesar smiled and said softly, The new headquarters building of Stark Industries is powered by the new arc reactor. If it is used at its maximum frequency, the normal electricity consumption of New York City can still be supported. This time there was no need for the two of them to explain. Everyone else completely understood. I'll inform Director Fry that Loki will send Barton to attack Stark's headquarters. Natasha knew the urgency of the situation. She got up from her seat and was about to walk out when the iron door opened from the outside. No need. I've already heard it. Director Fry walked into the research room and glanced at everyone. He turned on the communicator he carried with him and said to the staff in the main driving hall, Now adjust the direction of the helicopter carrier and set off to Stark Industries in the center of New York. Natasha's expression relaxed a little and said cheerfully, Very good, we have found Barton's next purpose. We just need to solve the purpose of Loki's willing arrest. Director Fry said in a deep voice, That man is not easy to deal with. His mind is unfathomable. It's difficult to use words to get information from him. Gathering information is my specialty. I'll go and meet Loki alone. Natasha smiled charmingly. She shook her short bright red hair and walked out of the research room with graceful cat-like steps. She's really a thorny rose. I hope Loki doesn't stab his hand full of blood. Eddie shrank his neck and commented in a low voice. For no reason, Eddie felt a trace of surprise in his heart. It was as if the poison had been sleeping in Loki's body since he arrested him. He didn't gossip or complain about eating raw seafood. He scratched his head a little irritably and couldn't help but shout, Is there any live seafood? Hurry up and give me some. Otherwise, I can't guarantee that the master in my body won't go crazy like the green monster. This sentence was like a fuse that had been lit. Dr. Bana lowered his head and looked away from the screen. His eyes were no longer as gentle as before. He asked Eddie with a cold face, You are so annoying. You keep talking about the Hulk in my body. Do you not like me? Steve got up and inexplicably participated in this topic. He said coldly, Eddie, haven't you been eating since just now? Can't you behave yourself? What are you talking about? Eddie looked indignant. He walked to Steve and shouted, Arresting Loki is the work of the young master and me. You old antique are always late. You said from time to time that you wanted to bite people's heads. That can't be counted as a heroic act. Steve quickly retorted. AID chuckled and mocked, What's wrong? Do you want to take your shield and let's go out and have a duel? Seeing the two quarreling, the rest of the people in the room didn't stop them. Instead, they joined in the heated conversation. Thor picked up Thor's hammer and patted his strong chest. Do you want to fight? Even I, Thor, haven't said anything. You mere mortals talk big. Do you want to have a duel? Fry suddenly said, I don't care if you are Thor or not. As long as you are in the temporary SHLD base, you have to pay attention to your actions. Your brother killed more than 70 Earthlings. We haven't settled the score yet. Okay, let's settle it now. Thor raised Thor's hammer without any fear. He looked like he was going to start a fight at any moment. Seeing this, Hill quietly reached for the gun at his waist. Are you done talking? Dr. Bana took off his glasses. He was slightly unstable and began to breathe heavily. In just 10 seconds, the air in the research room was filled with the smell of gunpowder. Everyone in the room disliked each other and started to argue. The only one who didn't join in was the golden-haired boy who sat on the workbench and watched them silently. Have you finally started, Loki? Caesar seemed to have seen through everything. He ignored the noisy heroes and his SHLD personnel and looked sideways at the crystal magic staff on the table next to him. Caesar could clearly perceive that the magic staff was secretly activated, but it didn't release any substantial energy. Instead, it glowed with a subtle thought that interfered with people's minds. This kind of spiritual thought was very difficult to detect. It forcibly drew out the negative emotions in people's hearts. This was the culprit that caused everyone in the room to quarrel inexplicably. Only that kind of item can directly ignore the strength of a creature and directly do this. One of the Infinity Stones, the Mind Stone. Oh. Caesar suddenly raised his head and looked at the ceiling of the research room. His blue eyes pierced through the layers of steel deck and saw a fighter jet about 1,000 meters away from the helicarrier. It was approaching them without any hesitation. The leader in the cabin of the fighter was the Hawkeye agent whose mind was controlled. Meanwhile, the people in the research lab were still arguing endlessly. They didn't notice the approaching danger and enemy aircraft. Sure enough, without me you still can't do it. Caesar shook his head helplessly and no longer watched from the sidelines. His small white hand reached for the psychic staff, but he didn't hold the staff. Instead, he pinched the magic crystal on the staff that was shining with a purple-blue luster. Chapter 432. After the crystal at the head of the magic staff was crushed by Caesar, the magic staff, which was originally faintly shining with extraordinary luster, suddenly dimmed and became useless. With the destruction of the magic staff, the mind that was pulling people's hearts also quickly dissipated in the large scientific research room. Caesar, what did you do? Director Fry stared at Caesar on the stage with his only remaining eye. At this time, Caesar blew on his left palm and blew away the broken crystal fragments, revealing the hidden core inside. It was a bright and exquisite yellow gem. The other people in the room stopped quarreling at the same time and woke up from their mental trance. Thor, who was holding Thor's hammer, Hill, who was pulling out the pistol at his waist, and Steve, who was carrying the 5-star round shield, put down their weapons in time with a blank face. That was close almost. Dr. Bana held the computer table and patted his undulating left chest. His rapid heartbeat that was about to go out of control just now stopped at the critical point. Eddie sat on the chair and secretly felt lucky that the poison didn't cause trouble with him. Otherwise he would have already started a fight. Your souls have been bewitched. Caesar smiled faintly, suddenly opened his mouth and threw the yellow gem in his hand into his mouth as if it was candy. Everyone was stunned. Fry stepped forward and grabbed Caesar's calf with both hands. He turned his small body over and shook it constantly. Caesar, that's not something you can eat, spit it out for me. Caesar covered his mouth tightly with his hands and swallowed without hesitation with a gulp. This. Director Frey's tanned face was slightly pale at this time. He carefully put Caesar down. He was usually as steady as Mount Tai, but at this time he was uneasy and asked, "Are you okay? Do you feel any discomfort?" Caesar comforted him and patted his shoulder. He chuckled and said, "Don't worry, Fry. That thing is safe with me. Instead of worrying about me, you should worry about the safety of the aircraft carrier." The safety of the aircraft carrier? Director Fry was stunned. Particle matching successful. The matching rate is as high as 99%. Hearing the voice prompt, Dr. Bana put on his glasses and looked at the virtual screen. He was shocked and said, "I found the Tesseract, and its location is less than 100 meters away from the aircraft carrier?" Tap tap tap. At the same time, the sound of footsteps came from the corridor outside. Natasha's voice was heard, "I found Loki's purpose. He wants to use Bana to completely destroy this aircraft carrier." Before she could finish her sentence, the aircraft carrier suddenly trembled violently and then began to tilt to one side. The work tables, computers, and documents in the research room were all scattered on the ground. Everyone in the room was caught off guard and fell to the ground one after another. Caesar, who had been alerted, floated in the air in advance. He was like a balloon floating in the air, and he easily blasted away a work table that was thrown at him. Director Fry got up from the shaking ground and asked the communicator, "What the hell happened?" On the other side, the personnel in the cockpit hall immediately reported the attack back. "Director, we were attacked by a fighter jet. The turbine of the third engine was damaged and urgently needs to be repaired. Otherwise, the aircraft carrier will be forced to land continuously from a height of 10,000 meters. Listen, tell all the agents to prepare for battle immediately and protect the main cockpit. At the same time, change the direction of the aircraft carrier and return to the sea." Fry thought about the worst consequences and immediately made a decision. He looked at the heroes who got up one after another and said seriously, "I need someone to repair the turbine of the third engine." "I'll go. I'm the only one who can go." Caesar spread his hands and didn't wait for others to respond. He flew down the smoke-filled passage. Without Tani the Iron Man, he was the only one who knew mechanical engineering maintenance and could fly. Caesar flew to the corner of the passage and suddenly turned his head, glanced at Bana and Eddie and said meaningfully, "You guys stay put. I'll try to control myself." Bana crawled on the ground and responded with gritted teeth. Natasha, who rushed back to the research room, quickly rushed over and helped him up. "I'm going to help Caesar," Steve said, carrying the round shield and chased after Caesar. "I'm going to see the situation in the prison room. We can't let Loki escape." Thor picked up Thor's hammer and rushed in the direction of the prison room. Fry and the other SHLD personnel rushed to the main driver's hall. No one noticed that Eddie, who was sitting in a chair in the corner, was motionless like a statue. His eyes were dead gray and showed no signs of emotion. "As you said, I'm going to do it, Loki." A dark, sticky liquid was secreted from Eddie's feet and flowed on the floor. Its target was Dr. Bana, who was supported by Natasha. In the previous battle at the entrance of the church, which was the battle between Loki and Eddie, it seemed that Loki was completely suppressed. However, not many people knew that Eddie was careless and was hit in the chest by the magic staff. As the host, Eddie's mind was not controlled, but the poison in his body was not so lucky. Loki had planted the poison as a hidden chess piece, waiting for the moment to attack. Halfway through the crawling, the poison suddenly bounced up from the ground. Under Natasha's surprised gaze, the poison jumped onto Dr. Bana's body and disappeared under his clothes before anyone else could react. Eddie, who had regained consciousness, saw the poison enter Bana's body and his mouth opened wide in shock. "My God." In the prison room. "This is going to be a checkmate, SHLD, and the Avengers." Loki slowly opened his eyes and happily opened his hands. The automatic door of the glass trough inexplicably opened. "Wait, where's my staff?" Loki suddenly frowned. He could not sense the location of the psychic staff. At this moment, in the sky 10,000 meters above the outskirts of New York, The helicarrier could not maintain its balance and slowly fell down with only 3 turbine engines left. More than half of the third turbine engine had been blown up. It was as if a hole had been torn open in the aircraft carrier, exposing the internal passage of the aircraft carrier. Flames lingered on the surface of the passage and billowing black smoke. This is really tragic. Hawkeye really didn't hold back at all. Caesar came to the end of the passage and hovered in the air, glancing at the severely damaged third engine. Caesar, we have to put out the fire first. Steve hurriedly caught up from behind. He had taken a fire extinguisher from a corner and looked at the engine area with a little embarrassment. The fire does need to be put out, but your fire extinguisher alone is not enough. Caesar smiled and made the shape of a roller with his hands. He took a deep breath and his cheeks and belly bulged. Then he suddenly blew into the hole in the roller. Voila! The rapid wind whistled and quickly formed a small storm, sweeping through the engine area where the fire was serious. The flames were instantly extinguished by the wind pressure, and the thick black smoke dissipated in the wind. Chapter 433. There's such a thing? Looking at Caesar, who blew out the fire in one breath, Steve stood in the wind with the fire extinguisher in his hand. Captain, don't just stand there are enemies coming from behind you. Caesar immaturely threw out a sentence, then directly flew out of the gap in the passage. He left the helicarrier and floated 10,000 meters in the air, then carefully flew toward the third engine vortex that was severely damaged. Steve heard the reminder and hurriedly looked behind him. Sure enough, he saw several armed personnel with guns rushing over in the passage surrounded by faint smoke. They were armed personnel dressed as SHLD agents. When they saw Steve with a shield, their dark eyes flashed coldly, and they decisively raised the guns in their hands to shoot. Are they also people controlled by Loki? Steve thought to himself. At the same time, he did a tactical roll on the spot and quickly dodged the flying bullets. The bullets hit the floor and flickered with a series of bright sparks. The fire is quite strong, try this. Steve hid behind the wall of another passage and aimed the fire extinguisher at the narrow passage where the enemy attacked. The moment it opened, an intense burst of fire sprayed out. The white mist like dry powder instantly filled the corridor, and the armed personnel temporarily lost almost all of their vision. As a super soldier who was very good at close combat and fighting against many, Captain America Steve naturally wouldn't let go of this opportunity. He carried a 5-star round shield on his left arm, took a deep breath, held his breath, and barged into the powder-filled passage alone, and hammered the armed personnel who were mentally controlled. 50-50 Captain, looks like you're dealing with it well. Caesar, who was floating outside the helicarrier, glanced at the battle situation in the passage out of the corner of his eye. After complaining in his heart, he turned his gaze back to the third engine that was full of blast and burn marks. The engine vortex was like a giant mechanical Ferris wheel. When it spun rapidly with abundant energy, it could generate a huge propulsion force that could send hundreds of thousands of tons of helicarrier into the sky. However, in order for the helicarrier to fly normally, all 4 engine vortexes must be kept running. Without the power of one of the engines, although it could still barely stay in the air, the helicarrier would be in a tilted state, and its altitude would slowly decrease. If the 2 vortexes were to fail at the same time, the helicarrier would only meet the end of crashing. Let me see. Caesar's small body floated in the air and kicked away the broken steel plate that was stuck in the main vortex. Seeing that there were still many steel bars sticking out of the vortex, he couldn't help but slightly squint his bright blue eyes. His eyes gradually turned from blue to red. In the next moment, Caesar's eyes seemed to be burning, shooting out 2 solid laser beams. They swept across the steel bars and steel plates, and the steel barriers were all broken. The holes cut by the laser beams were as smooth as a piece of paper. Cleanup complete. Now it's time to reactivate the engine vortex. Caesar deactivated his thermal vision and looked at the gap in the tunnel. He called out, "Captain, how are things on your end?" "Not bad. How about you? Do you need my help?" Steve panted as he slammed the last armed man to the ground with a powerful shield bash. Then he responded loudly. Caesar said bluntly, "Go to the tunnel beside the vortex and find the external switch of the engine vortex. Pull it down and reactivate the vortex." "Reactivating the vortex switch will do?" Steve asked casually. "No, it still needs a little external force to push the internal vortex. I'll go inside the vortex and give it some help to push it up." As soon as Caesar finished speaking, he flew down and disappeared into the engine that was shaped like a giant Ferris wheel. Steve ran towards the external switch in the tunnel with a worried look on his face. He reminded Xiao Luo loudly, "If the engine restarts, you'll be torn to pieces by the high-speed rotating steel plates inside. I won't be able to answer to Kale if that happens. Don't worry about that." Caesar placed both of his hands on the internal vortex. Bathed in the bright sunlight, he converted the energy he absorbed into his body into power and began to use his own pure strength to push the third engine. Ka-ka. His small hands slightly sank into the steel plate, and the third engine vortex, which was more than 1,000 times larger and heavier than Caesar's, actually started to slowly move. It rotated faster and faster as it did so. "Now, Captain." Hearing Caesar's words, Steve came to the external switch, grabbed the red handle and pulled it down with both hands. Vroom vroom vroom, the reactivated third engine vortex, coupled with the acceleration force given by Caesar, finally started to rotate at an extremely fast speed on its own. The driving force generated stopped the downward inclination of the aircraft carrier. "Caesar? Come out quickly." Steve stood at the edge of the tunnel opening and looked at the rapidly rotating giant vortex. He could no longer see Caesar's figure clearly with his naked eye. This made him anxious and shouted, "Okay, stop shouting. You're deaf." Suddenly, a familiar voice came from behind Steve, and a tender and white hand was placed on his shoulder. Steve was shocked and looked back. Who else could it be but Caesar? He looked at the rapidly rotating vortex outside the tunnel and then looked at Caesar, who was floating in the tunnel. He was surprised and said, "Weren't you just... That was 2 or 3 seconds ago, please? Although you've been frozen for 70 years, your reaction can't slow down." Caesar shrugged. But before he could finish talking to Steve, the tunnel behind them that led to the interior of the aircraft carrier suddenly shook violently, accompanied by sharp and terrifying monster roars. "This is..." Steve and Caesar turned around with a serious expression. After looking at each other, they quickly rushed to the source of the tremors. At this time, at the bottom of the aircraft carrier, in a dimly lit tunnel area. Dong dong dong. A huge and burly shadow was dragging on the ground. A dark monster that seemed to have come from hell was pacing forward. It was 4 meters tall and its body was full of explosive block-like muscles. The surface of its body was covered with a layer of dark skin that was as tough as steel. White lines that looked like flames were branded on its sturdy chest. There were also several sharp black barbs that were 1/2 meter long on its back. Wild, strong, huge, and extremely ferocious. It was an image that was born purely for battle and killing. The dark monster gritted its teeth coldly. Every step it took shook the floor, leaving a row of deep footprints. Eddie and Natasha were hiding under some machinery on the side. Their bodies were curled up into a ball. They had goosebumps all over their bodies and they could not stop trembling. What is that thing?" After the dark monster walked away, Natasha gasped and asked Eddie with a trembling voice. Just a moment ago, when Dr. Banna turned into Hulk, its originally green skin was instantly covered by a layer of dark skin. Its tall and strong body expanded by 2 times. Then, the dark monster roared crazily and destroyed more than half of the research room with one punch. Steel was like tofu or biscuits in its mouth. The symbiotic poison has parasitized Hulk's body. Eddie's eyes were full of fear. He muttered to himself, "It's over. No one can stop it. Not only will this aircraft carrier be destroyed, even New York City will be destroyed." No one knew what kind of terrifying existence would be when the poison and Hulk fused. Chapter 434. Helicarrier in a dark corner of a basement. Natasha took a deep breath. Her eyes were filled with determination. She suddenly poked her head out and walked out from the bottom of the large instrument she had been hiding in. Seeing this scene, Eddie's face was full of confusion. He anxiously whispered, "Natasha, what are you doing? That monster is not far from us." Indeed, it's the combination of Hulk and the poison symbiotic body. Let's call it the poison giant, for now. It's very terrifying. I can't think of any way to deal with it. But it's because of this that I have to go out. Natasha looked back indifferently at Eddie, who was still trembling. She solemnly said with the determination to die, "We are members of the Avengers. If even we don't dare to deal with it, then this helicarrier will only welcome its destruction. The greater the power, the greater the responsibility." This was the responsibility and belief of a hero. Natasha was well aware of this. Therefore, no matter what the road ahead was, she would show herself without hesitation. After all, she had stayed in the darkness for long enough as a Black Widow. She wanted to use the rest of her life to pursue the correct path of light. Natasha? Eddie looked on helplessly as the red-haired woman, who was not much stronger than a human, rushed in the direction of the tunnel the poison giant had left through. The roars of the monster and the screams of the agents faintly reached his ears. Clearly, the enraged poison giant had begun to slaughter and destroy on the helicarrier. Eddie was silent for a moment. He fiercely hammered his soft feet. His fingernails dug deep into his palms. The tingling sensation drove away most of the fear in his mind. That's right. Instead of waiting for death, it was better to take the initiative and attack. Poison, you've always saved me. This time it's my turn to save you. Eddie immediately put this thought into action. He got up and chased after Natasha. At this time, in the underground area of the helicarrier. Close all the gates. Use the new energy weapons. Mobilize more people and increase the firepower. We have to stop it here, we can't let it go to the driving hall. More than a dozen nervous SHLD elite agents stood at the crossroads of the tunnel, each holding a strange energy gun in their hands. They formed a defensive line of 3 layers inside and 3 layers outside. At this time, they didn't even dare to breathe loudly as they waited patiently for the arrival of their target. Dong, dong, dong. The steel deck trembled rhythmically. At the end of the dark tunnel, accompanied by a bone-chilling growl, a tall and burly shadow approached from afar. The elite agents who formed the defensive line swallowed their saliva. Just as the source of the earthquake and the sound reached the maximum, all the movement suddenly stopped, and the tunnel area seemed to return to its previous calm and peaceful state. The agents looked ahead in bewilderment. Following the focus of their gazes, a black tentacle suddenly shot out from the darkness. In an instant, it traversed a distance of more than 10 meters and pierced through the chests of the 2 agents at the front. The rest of the agents were stunned for a moment. Then they shouted in fear, "It's coming, fire!" Dazzling and terrifying laser beams, better than fireworks, crazily followed the direction of the black tentacle and poured into the end of the dark tunnel. They densely hid a layer of tough black outer shell. The outer shell only cracked a little, but it quickly turned into liquid and reformed. It's a lie, right? The leader of the agents had an incredulous expression. One had to know that the new weapons in their hands were developed using the Rubik's Cube. They could even easily penetrate modern armored tanks. But now they couldn't even break through the outer shell of the target. This action angered the poison giant even more. It let out a deafening roar. The roar formed a substantial sound wave that reverberated in the straight tunnel. The agents subconsciously covered their ears. Amidst the screams of the 2 agents, their bodies were strung together by the tentacles. Then they were violently slammed against the walls on both sides. Although they wore the best protective suits, their human bodies were still as fragile as paste. They were smashed into meat paste by the black tentacles. Scarlet blood splattered on the bodies of the other agents. A dark and huge deformed monster revealed its face in the dim light. It had a pair of long, narrow and ruthless cold eyes. Its ferocious fangs dripped with mucus. Its entire body was filled with a violent, wild and oppressive aura. There were also a few black tentacles waving behind it. The poison giant. Not only did it have the powerful foundation of Hulk, but it also had an almost unbreakable protective outer shell and the super long-range ability to control the black tentacles. If it was said that Hulk represented endless burning anger, then the poison symbiotic body represented cold and merciless slaughter. When the two merged into one, it was a top-notch creation that was purely born for war. If there really was a creator god, even God regretted creating this ultimate creature that could slaughter everything. Monster, an absolute monster. Facing the poison giant's approach, the remaining elite agents on the ground began to tremble uncontrollably. They didn't have any thoughts of resisting or even fighting back. At this moment, a bullet came from behind the poison giant and hit the back of its head. The bullet fell flat to the ground and couldn't even scratch an itch. But this still attracted the poison giant's attention. It turned around and saw Natasha, who was wearing a combat leather suit, holding a pistol and beckoning it with her finger. "Big guy, it's dark. The sun should be setting soon. Roar." The poison giant roared in anger. What responded to Natasha was the rapid and violent shooting of several black tentacles. Natasha didn't have any thoughts of fighting. Seeing that she had attracted the aggro of the other party, she flung her bright red hair and turned to run without looking back. Natasha was in front and the poison giant was behind her. The two put on a life and death chase. Although Natasha kept running towards the narrow passage, the poison giant didn't care. It used its monstrous body to forcibly open a path and constantly narrowed the distance between it and Natasha. Seeing the iron stairs in front of her, Natasha sped up and jumped. She just managed to grab the handrail on the upper level, but the poison giant behind her caught up and knocked the iron stairs out of shape. Because it used too much force, it continued to break through 3 or 4 layers of inner steel walls. Natasha gasped for breath. She grabbed the handrail with one hand and her body hung in the air. Seeing that the poison giant was about to turn back, a hand suddenly grabbed her from above. Natasha looked up and saw that it was Eddie. Eddie pulled her up and said in a deep voice, "Natasha, you're right. We have to face it. Is there any way?" Natasha stood up and quickly asked. Eddie shook his head and said, "We can't deal with its combined state. Only by separating the poison and Hulk will we have a chance to deal with them one by one and break through." "How can we separate them? Does the poison have any weaknesses?" Natasha continued to ask. Eddie thought for a while with an ugly expression. His eyes lit up and he said, "As far as I know, there isn't. However, both the poison and Hulk are afraid of one person's existence. Does this count as a weakness?" "Who?" Natasha asked subconsciously. Eddie replied with certainty and calmness. "The symbol of peace, Kale." Chapter 435. Patriarch Kale? The anticipation on Natasha's face immediately disappeared. She stared at the serious Eddie and snappily said, "Are you joking? Where are we going to find that man now?" "Of course I know, I'm just saying." Eddie helplessly spread out his hands. He also felt that he had said something very useless. Everyone knew that if the symbol of peace, Kale, was here, he would definitely be able to deal with it and even completely reverse the current situation. But the problem was that the symbol of peace had left Earth 3 years ago and went to the distant and unknown Milky Way. He might not even be able to return safely. Evil god Loki must have heard about this. That was why he chose to enter alone with the psychic staff and the alien army. While the two of them were talking, along with a crisp cracking sound in the lower area, the poison giant's mouth and nose puffed out hot air. It tore the steel wall that was obstructing its advance into pieces with its bare hands. A monster head with sinister and sharp fangs poked out. Its white and narrow eyes faintly looked up. Its vertical pupils reflected the figures of Eddie and Natasha. Eddie and Natasha suddenly became like statues, standing motionless in place. Eddie's face was incomparably pale. He glanced at Natasha beside him and hinted in a low voice, "I'll count to 3, 2, 1. When it reaches 1, turn around and run." Okay. Natasha's forehead was dripping with cold sweat. Her dark red hair stuck to her beautiful face, and her body was extremely tense. Eddie directly shouted 1. As if they had practiced this countless times, the two of them turned around and ran toward the passage area behind them in one go. The poison giant was stunned for a moment. Then, it angrily roared and pulled out the cylinder that was more than 10 tons in weight. It lifted it up high like a toy and threw it toward the passage area above. Although she did not look back, Natasha's expression changed while running. She reacted quickly and pressed Eddie to the ground. The next moment, the steel pipe whizzed past his head at high speed and smashed into the entrance of the tunnel in front of him. The steel pipe with a radius of 3 meters sealed off his escape route. At the same time, 2 black tentacles shot out like bullets towards the backs of the 2 men. Natasha was quick to react. She pushed Eddie away with both of her hands and rolled backwards, causing the tentacles to miss and nail into the floor. Eddie and Natasha took advantage of this opportunity to hurriedly get up from the ground. They pressed their backs against the sealed tunnel and held their breaths as they watched the poison giant retract its tentacles. The poison giant's eyes were filled with a cold light and mucus flowed down from its fangs. It looked like it was sizing up a weak prey. "We're finished." Eddie laughed bitterly. Natasha was silent. Suddenly, she took a step forward and gestured with her hands to stop him. She said in a persuasive tone, "Bana, remember your nature. Don't let anger and killing get to your head. That's your body, your own body. You have to be the one in charge." The poison giant stared at Natasha. After a few seconds, it grinned and spoke in a hoarse voice, "It's a pity that this body is now under my control." This familiar tone. Eddie's body trembled as he exclaimed in surprise, "Poison, is that you? I'm not familiar with you." The poison giant coldly glanced at Eddie. The smile on Eddie's face froze. He covered his chest with his right hand and said in a hurt tone, "This is a bit too much. You've lived in my body for several years. You're too weak as a host. You didn't increase my strength at all. But now I feel like my entire body is filled with power." The poison giant clenched its dark fist and muttered to itself, "With this kind of power, I can definitely defeat that man." Before it could finish speaking, a silver hammer flew over at high speed and hit the poison giant's back. Eddie and Natasha dodged in time, and the poison giant smashed through the blocked passage. It tumbled and crashed into another underground area of the helicarrier. The hammer quickly returned according to its original trajectory. In the back passage, a golden-haired, bearded man wearing silver armor and a red cloak walked out in a domineering manner. He held the Thunder God's hammer in his right hand again and looked down at everyone with the posture of a god. "The man you're talking about, is it me?" Thor. Natasha and Eddie were pleasantly surprised when they saw the newcomer. In this helicarrier, if anyone had the strength to stop the poison giant, it would be Thor from God's domain. Loki took advantage of the chaos to escape. "Next we'll leave this to..." Thor looked at Eddie and Natasha and said in a very unyielding manner. However, before he could finish speaking, the helicarrier trembled violently, and a terrifying scene that seemed like a chain of explosions occurred. A huge black shadow flew over dozens of meters, leaving behind afterimages and approached Thor in the blink of an eye. Fast. It was too fast. Thor widened his eyes in shock. What was reflected in his eyes was the poison giant's dark, sturdy chest and a palm large enough to wrap a person inside. Thor instinctively waved his right hand forward, almost out of a god-level reflex after many years of space expeditions. However, just as Thor's hammer crackled with electricity, it was quickly grasped by the dark giant hand. Thor's expression changed drastically. He couldn't pull it out. Not only did the other party burst forth with speed, but its strength also far exceeded his expectations. Lightning come. Thor's eyes flashed with electricity as he held Thor's hammer tightly. His body seemed to have turned into the core of thunder, and his entire body was surrounded by crackling thunder and lightning. The thunder and lightning passed through Thor's right hand and Thor's hammer and poured into the poison giant's body. However, the poison giant grinned maliciously. Its muscles were only slightly slower due to the thunder and lightning. Its palm didn't loosen its grip on Thor's right hand at all. Instead, it lifted Thor's entire body off the ground bit by bit. "A mere ant dares to call himself a god?" The poison giant grinned maliciously. Using Thor as a hammer, it spun wildly in the air, causing strong winds to howl incessantly. Then it abruptly slammed down on the floor. Crack. The sound of bones cracking could be heard. The helicarrier trembled slightly, and the flat steel floor immediately caved in, revealing the outline of a human. The poison giant went back and forth, lifting Thor up like a little chick and slamming him back and forth on the floor. The red blood of a god splattered everywhere until the electricity around his body completely dimmed. Too cruel. Natasha couldn't bear to watch. "If this continues, he'll die." Eddie gritted his teeth and said, "But we have no other choice. We can't even take a single finger." Bang. In the end, the poison giant threw Thor onto the uneven ground. The poison giant looked down at Thor indifferently. At this moment, Thor was no longer the invincible and heroic figure he had been a few seconds ago. Thor's eyes were lifeless and he was lying limply on the ground, doubting his life. His blonde hair was messy and covered his face. Sticky blood dripped from the corner of his mouth, and the silver armor he wore was covered in cracks. It was a shocking sight. Victory and defeat were decided in the blink of an eye. It couldn't be said that Thor was too weak. It could only be said that Thor was slightly careless. In addition, the poison giant was too strong in close combat. It was so strong that it could represent the ceiling of this universe. Chapter 436. In the underground area of the aircraft carrier. I am the invincible Thor. It's not over yet. Thor lay on the floor, barely opening his mouth. His right hand trembled as he faced the poison giant in front of him and slowly raised Thor's hammer. If only he could see it. At this moment, on the roof of the aircraft carrier, dark clouds suddenly gathered under the divine might in the sky 10,000 meters above. The thunder and lightning within seemed to represent the wrath of the heavens. Just as the thunderbolts were about to converge into a ball and strike down on the helicarrier, in the basement of the helicarrier, a large dark foot stepped on Saul's chest, causing him to groan in pain. His strong body, which was riddled with scars, sank deep into the floor. What a pity, just a little bit more. Thor muttered weakly, unwilling to give up. His body trembled slightly as he lost consciousness. His right hand that was hanging high in the air lowered, and he released Thor's hammer. The thunderclouds in the sky instantly dissipated without a trace, and the brilliant sunlight once again bathed the aircraft carrier without obstruction. The poison giant looked down at Thor's hammer. He held the hammer's handle with one hand and exerted force with his body. His feet sank into the steel floor, but the Thor's hammer in his hand still didn't move. Thor's hammer was a divine artifact of the divine domain. After being cursed by the Heavenly Father Odin, it could no longer be wielded with pure strength. Only someone worthy of it could pick it up. However, the poison giant gave up in the next second. He extended a finger towards the unconscious Thor. His sharp dark fingernails were like blades as he pressed them against Thor's neck and slashed it from top to bottom. With an extremely sharp and ear-piercing sound, the already cracked silver armor was split in two, revealing his muscular upper body. "Poison, what are you trying to do?" Eddie asked in surprise. "Didn't he call himself a god? I want to have a taste of what the flesh and head of a god tastes like." The poison giant grinned, its jagged fangs dripping with mucus, treating Thor on the ground as a meal on its plate. "You can't do this. Wake up, Banna." Natasha's face was pale and bloodless. She knelt on the ground and tried to awaken Dr. Banna's consciousness in the original body. "I'll do it. After I eat him, I'll eat all of you too," the poison giant cruelly said. He used his fingernails as a weapon and raised them slightly before ruthlessly stabbing towards Thor's chest. As the strongest life form in the universe, he had to complete the baptism of God slaying. "No!" Natasha cried out in alarm. Just as the poison giant was about to kill Thor, an item quickly flew out from the side of the tunnel and blocked the black nail for Thor. The poison giant angrily looked down and saw that it was a round shield with 5 stars engraved on it that blocked its nail. It just happened to cover Thor's chest. To the current poison giant, steel was as weak as paper. However, after blocking its nail, only a white spot was left on the round shield. "This is..." Natasha and Eddie raised their heads in excitement and saw a young man in a tight blue battle suit at the other end of the passage. He was panting and it was obvious that he had just made it in time. "Captain. I'm not late, am I?" Steve's lips curled up slightly. "An old soldier who won't die." The poison giant's ugly face was ferocious. Hot steam came out of its mouth and nose as its hands clenched into fists the size of a human. "I forgot to say that I'm not the only one here." Steve shrugged and pointed at the poison giant's head. The poison giant looked up in surprise. A small fist was growing infinitely larger in its cold, white eyes. The fist even carried a violent hurricane. Bang! The poison giant seemed to have suffered an unprecedented heavy blow. Its body was fiercely pressed against the floor. The floor caved in and created a huge hole, causing it to tumble downwards. It smashed through several floors before finally stopping. "You guys are really heartless." A childish voice sounded in the room. Caesar was floating in the air with one hand holding the 5-star round shield and the other holding Thor's belt. He lightly landed on the edge of the hole. Young master?" Eddie let out a long sigh of relief and slid down with his back against the wall. He then said awkwardly, The poison, I already know." Caesar nodded and threw the round shield back to Steve. He then placed Thor in front of Eddie and Natasha. He turned around and faced the abyss-like hole. His tone was childish but firm. He said faintly, "Since I'm here, it's fine. That punch just now, I knew that you had been hiding your strength." Eddie forced a smile. "That's it." Natasha stared at Caesar's back in a daze. She didn't know why, but at this moment, the small figure in front of her overlapped with the invincible tall figure in her memory. "Caesar, what should we do with that monster?" Steve held the round shield and walked to the edge of the hole. He looked down at the dimly lit underground area. Since they were close to the bottom of the helicarrier, most of the machinery and equipment were down there. "To be honest, I'm not too sure. The combination of Hulk and the poison is really a headache." Caesar frowned slightly and clenched his fists. He didn't know if his undeveloped body could withstand a high-intensity battle. For the time being, let's give it a try. After all, in the field of close combat with the clone's superhuman bloodline, there was no reason for him to lose. Thinking of this, Caesar suddenly thought of something. He looked at the Thor's hammer on the ground and opened his right hand slightly. It would be a waste if he didn't use a free divine weapon. Under the surprised gazes of Steve and the others, the Thor's hammer suddenly floated up and automatically flew into Caesar's hand. Caesar's small hand was just barely able to hold the handle of the hammer. The sizzling thunder and lightning continuously flashed from the Thor's hammer into Caesar's body. It might work. With the power of this thunder and lightning. Feeling the surging thunder and lightning energy, Caesar blinked in surprise. His blue eyes faintly flashed with the light of day. He could convert the energy into the power in his body. With the Thor's hammer in his hand, it was equivalent to carrying an all-purpose power bank. "Captain, bring them to the main control hall. I'll go lure the poison giant away." Caesar held the hammer in his hand. His body floated up and he was about to take the initiative to sink into the hole. Caesar, I'll lend this to you for the time being. Steve threw the round shield in his hand. Caesar didn't stand on ceremony. He put it on his slender left arm and entered the hole fully armed. Eddie and Natasha supported each other. Steve went to Thor and carried the unconscious Thor on his back. Steve took the lead and urged, "Quick, the battle is about to start. I'm afraid this area will be affected and fall. We have to rush to the main control hall. I don't know what's the situation there." Eddie walked through the hole in the floor and said worriedly, "Captain, can young Master handle that monster alone? I'm not too sure either. But it's a pity that we're all burdens here." Steve sighed softly. He walked in front and said inexplicably, "But I believe in him." "Me too." Natasha nodded in agreement. Both of them saw some secrets from Caesar. Chapter 437. Caesar held the 5-star round shield in his left hand and Thor's hammer in his right as he slowly flew down from the hole. The bottom of the helicarrier was pitch black, and there was only the sound of machinery and cylinders operating continuously. The giant crater that was originally caused by the poison giant's fall was now empty, and the target was nowhere to be seen. "Were you waiting for me?" Caesar's sapphire blue eyes lit up slightly. The darkness was unable to affect his superhuman vision. He glanced around and easily saw the layout of the space in his mind. It could be seen that there were many sticky black lines in the underground. They interweaved and formed many dark spider webs. They sealed all the entrances and exits of the passageways, so much so that this area had turned into a spider web trap. There was only a hole 20 meters above, and a dim light pillar with a radius of 3 meters shone down from the hole above. It just happened to cover Caesar's small figure. "Poison, when did you learn this ability? I don't remember Eddie ever telling me about it." Caesar didn't panic. His small face was unusually calm as he clicked his tongue in wonder at the corner of the dark area beside him. Spider web. Logically speaking, it appeared a little too early. Following Caesar's words, the sound of heavy footsteps came from the dark corner, and the steel deck trembled slightly. The poison giant's burly and shocking body appeared. It revealed its yellow and white fangs and said hoarsely, "Of course you don't know. Because I've never trusted you in these past few years, Caesar. Including the previous host, Eddie." "Poison, what do you mean by this?" Caesar looked up and calmly stared at the poison giant from 10 meters away. What stood in front of him now was the combination of Banna, Hulk, and Poison. However, at this stage Banna and Hulk were in a deadlock. The addition of a third party's Poison undoubtedly had complete control over this invincible physique. The poison giant spread out its hands like a human and didn't show any signs of losing control or anger. It was abnormally calm and said, "Caesar. Over the years I've been in Eddie's body witnessing your growth. To be honest, I'm completely shocked by your potential. I've seen countless powerful warriors on Sokka Planet, and I've also traveled through the Milky Way galaxy, and I know many alien races. I've never seen anyone like you." "What about me? I'm just a kid." Caesar pouted. "Child?" The poison giant smiled coldly and said in a hoarse voice, "A child can send a civil aircraft that has lost control at an altitude of 10,000 meters back to the ground? Could a child raise an active volcano to the ground? A child can push a pirate submarine out of the water from 1,000 meters deep?" "Caesar. Instead of saying that Hulk and I are monsters, you are the real monster hiding on Earth. I've always wanted to find a way to defeat you, but as time passed, I couldn't make any progress in Eddie's body, while you continued to grow stronger. I felt more and more despair about this." The poison giant paused and clenched its fists. It growled unwillingly, "I've begun to realize that I can't become stronger by staying in Eddie's body. Defeating you is an extravagant hope." Caesar said in realization, "So that's how it is. So you've been secretly possessing other humans behind Eddie's back." "That's right." The poison giant raised its hand slightly, and a few black threads shot out from its wrist and nailed into the edge of the hole in the ceiling above. It weaved into a net at a speed visible to the naked eye, sealing the last door that could allow them to escape. At this time, only a few strands of light passed through the gaps in the dark net and fell on Caesar and the poison giant. The poison giant tore off the black sticky threads on its hand and looked at the dark spiderweb. This ability and move was developed by plundering genes from a boy in Queens, New York half a year ago. "Even though I like to attack in a straightforward manner, in order to defeat you, I will use all the means at my disposal." Its tone was cold and firm. There was no anger or loss of control, only an obsession that bordered on madness. Yes, I can already feel how difficult you are to deal with. Caesar narrowed his eyes solemnly. Because of the opponent's powerful aura, his body was also tense to the extreme due to the tension and pressure. Hulk's madness wasn't scary. What was scary was that an existence far stronger than Hulk was actually calmly thinking about tactics. So let's begin. Let's have a good fight here. The poison giant stuck out its scarlet tongue and licked its fangs excitedly. Its dark and huge muscular body slightly squatted down. Wait a moment, Caesar coughed and said doubtfully, I still have 2 questions. First, are you really controlled by Loki? Second, why do you want to defeat me? I won't fight you before you answer my questions. You're so small, why are you so talkative? The poison giant was slightly impatient as it sneered. Loki, that arrogant and conceited guy, only has the same goal as him. He wants to use the spirit staff's buff to bring my strength 1 step closer to yours. As for why I want to defeat you, I know that if I don't cross your mountain first, I'll never see that man's back. With a long voice, the poison giant suddenly moved. Huge footprints were left on the ground where it had been standing. Its obviously strong and swollen body burst out with a terrifying supersonic speed and turned into a black stream of light that bombarded Caesar. Is that so? Then as you wish. Caesar's reaction was just as fast as an afterimage. He didn't have any intention of retreating or dodging. He raised the round shield in his left hand and turned into a golden stream of light that welcomed the poison giant. In the blink of an eye, a gigantic dark fist and a 5-star round shield collided with each other like Mars crashing into Earth. The poison giant and Caesar, one big and one small, vaguely appeared in the air. The two didn't play any fancy tricks and just fought with their strongest burst of strength from the start. It was clearly a pure burst of strength in close combat, but the moment the fist and the shield came into contact, the air instantly exploded with the battle as the center. The shockwaves transmitted by the power were weakened by layers of spider webs, and the terrifying aftermath fell on the inner wall of the helicarrier. At this time, in a wide passage on the upper level of the helicarrier, Steve carried Thor on his back and walked in front to open the way. Natasha and Eddie followed behind, constantly moving towards the main control hall of the helicarrier. We're almost there. Steve looked at the corner of the passage not far ahead and was about to continue moving forward, but the helicarrier suddenly trembled, making the 3 of them support themselves on the wall in bewilderment. This was just the beginning. Immediately after, the helicarrier didn't show any signs of stopping, causing the items and corpses in the helicarrier to roll on the ground. The source of the tremors came from the bottom of the helicarrier. Natasha pressed her palm against the inner wall and quickly determined through observation. Steve looked at the inside of the helicarrier that was trembling inside. It's Caesar. They're fighting. There was no room for anyone to intervene in this battle between monsters. Chapter 438. Between the New York City and the ocean, dark clouds covered the vast sky of 10,000 meters in the sky. The sun shone on the helicarrier, and the black steel shell reflected the cold light. The 4 vortexes of the engines turned together, shattering the wind and clouds within a kilometer radius. Shockwaves visible to the naked eye, originating from the bottom of the aircraft carrier, affected the interior of the aircraft carrier like a tidal wave. The helicarrier kept shaking, causing the people and objects inside to be in a mess. Loki's escape was only the beginning of the war. In other words, Loki had been captured on purpose from the beginning, so that he could come to the temporary base of S.H.L.D. and the Avengers. Then he secretly controlled Hawkeye Barton to destroy the 3rd vortex, and bewitched Toxin and Banna, indirectly creating the uncontrollable monster, the poison giant. Everything was to prevent the people from Earth from ruining his great plan. On the open deck of the helicarrier, Luo Ji, who was wearing a golden armor and a cape, stood at the edge of the deck. The wind in front of him messed up his black hair. Feeling the shockwaves from the battle below, he couldn't help but smile evilly. That's right. Killing each other has always been the bad habit of you humans. Is that so? A calm voice suddenly came from behind him. Rocky's face stiffened as he turned around to look. He saw one of Director Fury's right-hand men, Agent Ko-sen, standing behind him. He was holding a rechargeable gun with both hands, and the muzzle of the gun was pointed at him. Agent Ko-sen said coldly, "That arrogance is the bad habit of you fake gods. Raise your hands." "What weapon is that?" Loki looked at the strangely shaped gun and sensed a dangerous aura from it. He subconsciously obeyed and raised his hands high, but secretly began to cast a divine domain spell. "It's made with the energy from the Tesseract. Do you want to try its power? Agent Ko-sen said calmly. That won't be necessary. Loki smiled strangely and his body suddenly disappeared. Agent Ko-sen's expression changed slightly, and then he felt a chill behind him. Some kind of sharp weapon had pierced through his back. But the rechargeable weapon fell to the edge of the deck. As the deck shook violently, it bounced a few times before being thrown out of the deck. Agent Ko-sen groaned in pain, his body twitching and struggling. The blood-stained dagger protruded from his chest, dripping blood. Loki maintained his evil smile and pushed his body forward with a sharp weapon, pushing him to the edge of the aircraft carrier deck. Unfortunately, we have the right to be arrogant. Loki whispered and decisively pulled out his golden dagger. He pushed Agent Ko-sen off the deck and into the dark, roaring thundercloud below. A figure quickly flashed past Loki's side and jumped off the deck without hesitation. In the air, the machine on his back spread out its steel wings. With the engine humming, he accelerated and dived to chase after the free-falling Agent Ko Sr., a falcon? Loki sneered, sneak attacking me was clearly the right choice, but you ran to save the weak who was dying. This is also one of the stubborn bad habits of you humans. A black fighter jet approached the helicarrier. The back cabin door opened, and the scientist who was also under mind control said respectfully to Loki on the deck, Lord Loki, I'm here to pick you up. Loki nodded coldly and jumped into the back cabin of the fighter jet. He looked down at the helicarrier and asked the scientist who was bowing, Is everything ready? The scientist hurriedly nodded, Everything is ready. The only place left to provide energy can activate the Rubik's Cube and open the interstellar portal as you wish. Very good. Now head to the Stark building immediately, Loki ordered with a smile. Understood. The scientist accepted the order and left. The back cabin gradually closed. The black fighter jet carried Loki away from the helicarrier and headed towards New York City. A few seconds later, the steel wings pierced through the dark clouds. Falcon Sam carried the severely injured and unconscious Agent Ko-sen out of the thunderclouds and landed on the deck of the trembling aircraft carrier. He looked at the black fighter jet disappearing into the clouds and quickly turned on the communicator. Captain, it's me, Sam. Loki has already left the aircraft carrier in a fighter jet. I have injured people here so I can't follow him. Got it. I also have injured people on hand, and there's an extremely troublesome person here. On the other side of the communicator in the tunnel area near the main pilot hall. Steve hung up the communicator. He carried the unconscious Thor on his back and looked straight ahead with a serious expression. Eddie and Natasha, who were following closely behind, also stopped in their hurried steps. 10 meters away, a black-haired agent in a black uniform was confronting the three of them. He was coldly on guard against Steve and the others. He held a special longbow in his left hand and reached for the quiver on his back with his other hand. Barton? Natasha couldn't help but walk forward. Soon she was stopped by Steve. Wait a minute, he's obviously still under control. I understand. Natasha took a deep breath and calmed herself down. Her beautiful eyes met Hawkeye Barton's and she said slowly, Do you still remember me? Barton were the real teammates. Barton remained silent and looked at Natasha. A ripple flashed through his dark eyes, and he actually retracted his right hand. You really do remember. Natasha had just let out a sigh of relief when Barton's eyes suddenly turned cold. He quickly pulled out a few arrows with his right hand and nailed them into the inner walls on both sides. Then he turned around and ran without looking back. Be careful. Looking at the special arrows that were beeping, Steve cried out in alarm. He threw himself back and pressed Natasha and Eddie to the ground. Then the special arrows nailed to the wall detonated like a high-explosive bomb. Flames and waves of explosion washed over the tunnel area. The pitiful Thor, the god of thunder, had to act as a human shield, increasing the number of injuries on his body. When Steve and the others got up from the ground, coughing, Hawkeye Barton had long since disappeared from the tunnel. Go after him. Steve carried Thor on his back again and said in a low voice. He went to the main pilot hall. I'll go. Natasha gritted her teeth and rushed to the main pilot hall without caring about her injuries. The main pilot hall was no longer as tidy and orderly as before. All kinds of documents and chairs were lying around. Fortunately, the computer control equipment was not damaged. Director Fry stood on the stage in the middle of the hall and commanded the staff to maintain the normal navigation of the aircraft carrier. He also dispatched special agents to clean up the enemies that had snuck into the aircraft carrier. Agent Hill stood beside Fry and looked around vigilantly. At this moment, she saw a familiar figure appear at the door from the corner of her eye and aimed at them with a bow. She couldn't help but block Fry with her body in horror. Enemy. As soon as she said that, Hawkeye Barton, who had entered the hall, shot his first arrow. The arrow narrowly missed Agent Hill's head, as if it had been shot by mistake. But how was that possible? That was Hawkeye's arrow. Agent Hill looked behind her and saw that the staff in the hall were in a mess. The arrow was inserted into the central console. The modified arrow was inserted into the socket, and the corresponding computer screen turned into a blurry screen half a second later. Emergency procedures activated. Turn off the first and second engine vortexes. Chapter 439. In the main pilot's hall. Warning lights flashed in every corner. The chaotic hall suddenly fell silent when they heard the notification that the engine turbines were turned off. From Director Fry to the staff, everyone held their breaths nervously. The helicarrier only had a total of 4 engine vortexes. One of the engines was damaged just now, which had seriously affected the normal navigation of the entire aircraft carrier. And at an altitude of 10,000 meters in the sky, half of the engine vortexes were turned off at the same time. What did this mean? There was probably no one who didn't know. If one was outside, they would be able to see that the first and second engine vortexes on the same side of the helicarrier's power source gradually stopped spinning, leaving only the third and fourth engines on the other side operating at high load. However, the boost from the 2 engines alone was not enough to keep the helicarrier afloat. As the helicarrier trembled violently again, it tilted towards the side where it lost its power source. Soon it reached an angle of more than 30 degrees. The 2 engine vortexes that had stopped dragging the aircraft carrier were like a burden as they began to fall towards the thunderclouds and the land below. Whoa, be careful. Hold on tight. Screams continued in the main pilot's hall. The originally smooth-tempered floor had now become a fatal shaking slope. Coupled with the sense of weightlessness of falling, the personnel and items inside kept sliding to the side. Most of them piled up on the floor-to-ceiling windows at the bottom. Some of the SHLD personnel reacted quickly and used fixed equipment and walls as handrails to stabilize their bodies. As the aircraft carrier tilted and fell, Barton shot an arrow in time and nailed it to the ceiling. The tail of the arrow dragged a steel cable, and the tail was connected to his waist, using this to hang himself in midair in the hall. His eyes were as dark as ink and his face was expressionless. He pulled out another modified arrow, knocked it on the bowstring and aimed it at the control panel that controlled the third and fourth engine vortexes. His intentions were exposed. "The mission is over, Lord Loki," Barton muttered and decisively shot the arrow. But before the arrow could fly halfway, a handgun was tossed down from above and accurately intercepted the arrow. Barton raised his head and looked up. He saw a black figure descend from the highest point of the passage. His crimson short hair fluttered in the wind. Exquisite long legs wrapped in tight black leather clothes kicked Barton's wrist with a strong wind, sending the special bow in his hand flying. "You!" Barton's eyes sharpened. He punched back, but his opponent's body was shockingly flexible. The moment she dodged his attack, her slender leg clamped down on his arm while her other leg wrapped around his neck. Using the limb as a weapon tight-knit, the person who came was the Black Widow Natasha. She tied Barton with her legs and grabbed the steel rope with her hands. The two of them were suspended in the air of the hall, swinging left and right like a pendulum. She coldly shouted, "Are you still not waking up, Barton?" Barton struggled with all his might, but his neck was strangled. His face was red from suffocation, and he couldn't use his full strength or breathe normally. His resistance weakened. During this process, his originally pitch-black eyes gradually regained their clarity and radiance. Barton completely gave up resisting and patted Natasha's shoulder. Natasha seemed to sense it and loosened the leg that was strangling her neck. Barton coughed a few times and took deep breaths. "Thanks. You're welcome." Knowing that Barton had regained his consciousness, Natasha couldn't help but breathe a sigh of relief. She looked up at the entrance of the passage and saw Steve carrying Thor and Eddie entering the hall with the help of the slanted wall. "You guys are finally here." Director Fury, who was in the corner, saw them, and the solemn look on his face faded a little. He looked at Agent Hill, who had climbed onto the bridge, and asked loudly, "How is it? Can you restart the 2 vortexes?" Agent Hill held onto the bridge and pulled out the arrow stuck in it. His 5 fingers flicked quickly to operate the virtual screen and replied, "It can be restarted, but it will take time. At least 3 minutes." 3 minutes? Director Fry frowned deeply. At this time the aircraft carrier had fallen into the thunderclouds. Thunderclaps were endless, and a few bolts of lightning directly hit the floor-to-ceiling windows. Shocking cracks appeared on the tempered glass. The personnel on the floor-to-ceiling windows screamed and climbed up on the slanted floor. Agent Hill hurriedly said, "At this speed, let alone 3 minutes, we will crash together with the aircraft carrier in about 2 minutes. In such a short time, it's too late to evacuate or ask for backup." Director Fry talked to himself and calmly thought of a solution. But even if he racked his brains with their current situation, it seemed that there was no other choice but to wait for death. Many S.H.L.D. personnel looked at the thunderclouds outside that were constantly moving backward. They were already crying in despair. After all, manpower was limited. It was easier said than done to stop an aircraft carrier that weighed hundreds of tons from falling. "I'm sorry, it's all my fault." Barton recalled what he had done and covered his face with both hands. He blamed himself. "It's not your fault. You were controlled by Loki." Natasha took a deep breath and looked at Steve. "What should we do now, Captain?" "Let me think about it." Steve handed Thor to Eddie and touched his chin. The first thing that came to his mind was Kale's face, but he quickly shook his head. Even if Kale was here, he wouldn't be able to solve the current mess, right? Not to mention that he was not on Earth right now. Steve suddenly thought of something. He took out a small flip phone from his pocket and dialed a number. After a few seconds of ringing, the phone was connected. Caesar's slightly childish response came, "Captain, I'm still busy here, can't you feel it?" As if in response to his words, the bottom of the falling aircraft carrier trembled again. It was far more terrifying than a lightning strike. "The first and second engine systems have been hacked, the aircraft carrier we are on is falling." Steve succinctly conveyed the urgent message. Even he didn't know why he thought of Caesar at this moment. That kid was fighting against the invincible poison giant at the bottom of the aircraft carrier. "I felt it a long time ago, don't worry. As long as I'm here, everything will be fine." Caesar's words were childish and firm. It was hard to believe that he was not even 5 years old, and he was fighting against the strongest creature at the same time. Where did his confidence come from? Many thoughts flashed through Steve's mind. In the end he chose to believe. "Do you trust me?" "Of course." 70 years ago, on the out-of-control train, the conversation of life and death echoed in Steve's ears again. "So, that's how it is." Steve's lips curled up and he hung up the flip phone in his hand. In this regard, Natasha looked at him in confusion. "You'll know in a while." Steve looked out the window at the still falling height. His hands quietly clenched. At the bottom of the aircraft carrier, in the dark space enclosed by the dark spider web. "You dare to pick up the phone when you're fighting with me? Please be serious." A monster-like roar sounded. The poison giant threw a heavy punch and sent Caesar flying. There were still a few circles of white waves and strong wind at the end of the fist. It took a step forward and stepped on the 5-star round shield on the ground. It used so much force that its feet sank into the floor. Caesar smashed into the tough dark spider web and broke through 2 layers of walls before stopping. "Be serious?" With a glaring red light in his eyes, Caesar tore off the spider web hanging on his body and stood up. He suddenly threw the Thor hammer aside and smiled innocently. "In fact, I don't have the mood to continue playing with you." Chapter 440. Oh. Seeing that Caesar had taken the initiative to throw away Thor's hammer, the poison giant's ugly and ferocious face revealed a trace of surprise and disappointment. The soles of its feet seemed to be glued to the floor, as steady as Mount Tai. The poison giant turned a blind eye to the fall of the helicarrier. The weightless environment did not have the slightest practical effect on it. It spat out a mouthful of saliva that corroded the floor. Its white beastly eyes stared straight at Caesar's tiny body as it hoarsely said, "Without the shield under my feet that can dissipate power and impact, and without the hammer that can emit thunder and lightning, how are you going to fight me when you're already at a disadvantage?" At present, the 1-meter-thick deck floor and the basement that was covered in dark cobwebs were full of potholes after the fierce collision just now. Some of the potholes were so deep that one could see the thunderclouds outside. After the thunderclouds, one could vaguely see the lights of the city on the land. Just as Captain America said, there was not much time left for Caesar and the helicarrier. The air rapidly flowed outwards and the wind whistled inwards. This vicious cycle formed in the underground space where the battle was taking place. "I don't need any weapons to begin with. This body itself is the strongest weapon." Caesar smiled. In the battle just now, his shirt and t-shirt were torn and tattered, hanging on his body like a few pieces of cloth. He simply tore off his shirt completely and exposed his upper body like the poison giant. That's. The poison giant's eyes widened slightly. It saw that Caesar's 5-year-old body was not as white and fragile as it looked on the outside. His abdominal muscles were as if they were made of steel, tight and strong. After being exposed to the sun for a long time, they were dyed with an extremely healthy bronze color. Even in the impact of the battle just now, which ranged from tens of tons to hundreds of tons in weight, this craft-like young body in front of it did not leave any wounds. Strong, extraordinary, and extremely powerful. There was no doubt that this was a body of steel. How could this be a body that a child could have? There's not much time left. I'm going up, poison. Caesar smiled brightly at the poison giant. Just as he assumed a charging posture, his body instantly blurred and disappeared from where he was, leaving behind a violent shockwave. So fast, the poison giant's pupils abruptly contracted. In the blink of an eye, Caesar had teleported close to its chest and punched out with a force far more astonishing than a cannonball. Caesar had always relied on Thor's hammer to attack and Captain America's shield to defend. This was the first time he relied on his body to attack. Just in time. The poison giant let out a low roar. Even though its body was bloated, it was as fast as lightning. Its extremely thick dark arms swung forward as it instinctively retaliated with its fists. If it was close combat, there was no reason for it to lose. In the blink of an eye, two completely disproportionate fists, one big and one small, collided together. At this moment, the poison giant and Caesar's figures froze. Everything around them, including the time in their surroundings, froze. Afterward, two balls of light, one black and one white, glowed on the tips of the two fists of different sizes. They collided, intertwined, and finally exploded. It was just a pure collision of strength, but it was like a collision of high-tech missiles. It was as if a few tons of explosives had been compressed into a very small ball of energy and shockwaves. With the two of them as the center, layers upon layers of shockwaves spread out from the air like a tide. Boom! Several tough dark spiderwebs were directly broken, and the first layer of steel walls was even corroded by the shockwaves. In the main pilot's hall, the terrifying shockwaves were clearly transmitted here. The floor and ceiling shook like an earthquake, and the people and equipment inside were suddenly thrown into the air. Due to the weightlessness, they continued to roll in the room. Wah! Eddie was thrown down from the mouth of the passage and was quickly grabbed by the collar by a strong arm. Steve lifted him and Thor together in one hand while his other hand grabbed the door handle. Steady. Steve's face was as calm as water as he looked down at the floor-to-ceiling window below. The aircraft carrier had already passed through the thunderclouds and descended to a height of 6,000 to 7,000 meters. Further down was the brightly lit suburbs of the city. Believe in him. Right now we can only believe in him. Natasha put her hand on Barton's neck and said in a deep voice. The seemingly evenly matched fist fight was just the beginning. Caesar, who was floating in the air, didn't retreat. His left fist didn't stop pressing against the giant's fist. His 5 fingers were clenched tightly as he raised his right fist. Under the poison giant's shocked gaze, he didn't even have time to accumulate strength before he punched towards its chest again. You bastard! The poison giant gritted its teeth and reacted extremely quickly. It raised its fist again to receive the punch. The two fists collided, and a powerful shockwave similar to the one from before erupted. It set off circles of white air waves that violently slammed against the broken wall. Caesar's small face didn't change. His body was steady in the air as he repeated the movements of withdrawing and punching. His attacks were swift and powerful without any delay. His small arms formed afterimages as he punched forward like a cannonball. The poison giant's face gradually changed. It originally thought that the punches that were infused with the power of 10,000 kilograms were the opponent's ultimate move. Only now did it understand that it was just an ordinary attack. Every punch was more than 100% of the strength of the punch. When such punches reached a torrent of attacks, the poison giant kept waving its fists to block the punches. Sweat flowed down from its forehead as it began to gasp for air that was extremely hot. The collision of superhuman fists caused the basement to be engulfed in a torrential storm. The powerful aftershocks tore through the steel walls, revealing a hole that allowed them to see the land and the sky. At first, the poison giant could still keep up with the rhythm, but under the continuous high-intensity punches, it felt that its huge limbs were becoming more and more cumbersome. It was difficult for it to keep up with Caesar's punches. And Caesar didn't seem to know what fatigue was. He continued to punch mechanically without any signs of stopping. Boom. Finally it couldn't block the punch. Caesar's small fist landed on the poison giant's chest. The super strong muscles that even lasers couldn't do anything to were now trembling as if they were about to crack. The aftershocks passed through the poison giant's body and burst out from its back. "You bastard!" The poison giant groaned in pain and took half a step back. Even the steel floor under its feet caved in. It angrily puffed up its chest and wanted to fight back, but Caesar rushed forward instead. His small fists carried the power of 10,000 kilograms. Boom, boom, boom. A few more punches violently landed on the poison giant's puffed-up chest, breaking its reinvigorated strength and completely shattering its arrogant belief of being invincible. "Caesar, you..." The poison giant let out a depressed roar and kept retreating. Caesar approached step by step. It weakly stretched out its hand, wanting to grab Caesar, but the huge dark palm was beaten back without any suspense. Caesar's eyes glowed red. Taking advantage of this opportunity, the small muscles all over his body bulged. His fists landed on the poison giant's defenseless chest. At a super-fast rate of more than 10 punches per second, each punch landed on the poison giant's 4-meter-tall body and forced it to continuously retreat. The poison giant's feet plowed out grooves as it kept retreating until its back touched the last wall of the helicarrier. The wall began to crack. It kept waiting for an opportunity, but in the end, it only welcomed a deep sense of despair and realization. "It's over," Caesar whispered as he looked at the poison giant. His punches didn't stop. Instead, they became faster and more violent. Every punch changed the air pressure and direction of the wind in the basement. "As expected. Caesar, as expected, you're even more powerful." The poison giant let out a low roar. Before it could finish speaking, the steel wall collapsed and its huge dark body was flung out. It was still in the air. The poison giant split into two. One turned into a ball of viscous dark liquid, while the other turned into a large green hulk. They kept tumbling down. Chapter 441. At the severely damaged opening in the deck. Caesar stood alone at the edge of the deck. His upper body was bare and his abdominal muscles were exposed. Wisps of steam rose from his bronze skin. His chest was heaving up and down, and his hands were still clenched into fists. He was clearly less than a meter tall, but at this moment he looked like an invincible war god. Caesar looked at the poison giant that flew out of the aircraft carrier. Its bloated body split into two and returned to its original form of poison and hulk. He took a deep breath, and only then did his highly tensed body and mind relax slightly. But the moment he relaxed, the soreness, hunger, and exhaustion of his body, as well as the emptiness of the energy in his body, rushed over like a tidal wave. Although defeating the poison giant seemed simple and straightforward, in reality, the battle just now had exhausted all of Caesar's strength and foundation. Even the lightning energy absorbed from Thor's hammer had been converted into bioenergy and strength in his body, and had been completely squandered. If not for the energy replenishment from Thor's hammer, the outcome of this life and death battle would have been hard to say. "It's over like this." Caesar's body was covered in sweat. He only felt that the strength in his body had been drained. This was the first time he had felt so weak and powerless since his clone was revived. His eyelids were heavy as lead, and his consciousness was becoming more and more blurry. No matter how strong the blood flowing in his body was and how strong his body was, this body was still not fully developed. Caesar slowly closed his eyes. His body fell forward, and just like that he fell through the opening in the deck. He had just left the interior of the aircraft carrier when he was caught in the strong wind outside and fell down. His blonde hair was blown into a mess by the wind. Because the aircraft carrier still had two vortex engines, the speed of its fall was half a beat slower than Caesar's free fall. The tilted aircraft carrier and the unconscious Caesar. The two fell one above the other. When the altitude dropped to about 3,000 meters, the forests, lakes, towns, and so on the land below became clearer. The men who labored on the outskirts of New York had only to raise their heads that morning. It was like a fortress, but it was bigger than a fortress. It was like an island, but it was more angular than an island. It was a helicopter aircraft carrier created by Earth's top technology, and it descended from the sky with black smoke curling behind it. In the main driving hall. "Can you restart the engine in time, Hill?" Director Frey's face was ugly. He looked at the approaching surface and then looked at Agent Hill on the bridge. Agent Hill's face was extremely pale. She shook her head and said, "I still need more than a minute. I can't make it." "In half a minute the aircraft carrier will crash to the ground." "Is that so? Is this the end?" Director Fry smiled bitterly. He clenched the handrail so tightly that his knuckles turned white. Once the helicarrier crashed, the ammunition inside would undoubtedly explode, blasting everything within a dozen kilometers of the crash site into nothingness. The SHLD staff and the members of the Avengers on this aircraft carrier would suffer heavy casualties. No one on Loki's side stopped him. After he opened the interstellar portal, the alien army would occupy and slaughter this blue planet. After this battle ended, the human race on Earth would be destroyed. Damn it. Holding the iron door handle with one hand, Steve's face was slightly red. His tall body was hanging at the entrance of the passage, and his other hand was holding Thor and Eddie. The communicator he carried with him suddenly rang. "Captain, are you there?" "Sam," Steve responded in a low voice. "Captain, are you in the main driving hall?" "I'm coming to save you now." Outside the descending helicarrier, Falcon Sam was wearing goggles. He was spreading his steel wings and diving down headfirst, trying to find the location of the main driving hall. "No, don't come in." Steve decisively refused. Looking at the descending altitude of 2,000 meters, he said firmly, "If you go into the main hall of the aircraft carrier to save me now, you won't even be able to get away. If we are destined to die here, then you will be one of the surviving heroes of Earth." "Captain." Sam gritted his teeth. "You want me to watch you die? I can't do it." "We are not waiting for death," Steve said in a deep voice. "We are waiting for hope." "Oh," Sam repeated in confusion. "Yes, hope." Steve took a deep breath and looked out of the floor-to-ceiling window. They were still descending, but they could already see the end of the forest and lake. He said to himself, "The vibration of the fight has stopped, which means he won. Caesar said he can solve the current problem, then what is he waiting for?" At this moment, about 1,000 meters in the air, the unconscious Caesar was still tumbling down. In the whistling wind, Caesar's eyebrows twitched, and then he opened his eyes with difficulty. He looked at the land below him and then looked up at the aircraft carrier that was still falling. He instantly woke up. "Right, I can't stop here, I still have to stop the aircraft carrier from crashing," Caesar murmured weakly. His body was too tired, and there was no energy in his body that could be extracted and converted. He could not even maintain a normal flight, let alone try to save the aircraft carrier. "I was too careless, too careless. I actually used up all my energy and strength." Caesar clenched his fists unwillingly. Is this the end? Caesar had the same question as Fry. Suddenly, an orange-yellow light fell in front of Caesar's eyes, causing his eyes to be filled with sparkling golden light. "This is..." Caesar's eyes widened in surprise. He saw that the sky was covered by dark clouds, and the bright sunlight shone on his naked upper body. Thump. Caesar's weak heart suddenly beat vigorously, and his breathing became more and more regular. If he could look inside his body, he would see that a giant energy conversion factory had formed in his body, absorbing the falling solar energy crazily. "My strength is back." Caesar's eyes were as bright as the stars. He let out a breath, loosened his fingers, and then firmly clenched them into fists. He abruptly did a somersault in the air and instantly stopped the inertia of his falling body. Using the air as the ground, he leaped up and bathed in the sunlight as he continued to accelerate towards the aircraft carrier above. When he reached the bottom of the aircraft carrier, Caesar held his breath and pressed his small hands against the steel shell. Harder, harder. Ka. In just a moment, the steel shell that his palms were pressed against immediately caved in. Caesar's entire body was almost stuck inside. Even so, he still did not make a sound. He focused all his strength on his arms and sprinted toward the aircraft carrier. The aircraft carrier weighed hundreds of tons, but it still fell with a roar. In the blink of an eye, it slid down another few hundred meters. "Stop right there." Seeing that the aircraft carrier was a few hundred meters away from the ground, Caesar shouted. His upper body bulged slightly, and his arms were covered with blue veins. His entire body sank into the shell, and he desperately tried to push himself upward. The force formed a real shockwave, and with Caesar as the starting point, it spread along the aircraft carrier's shell. Chapter 442. In the main cockpit of the helicarrier. "Everyone, let's meet again in the next life." Eddie looked out of the floor-to-ceiling window. The forest land was getting closer and closer. He closed his eyes in despair. He was not the only one. Most of the survivors on the aircraft carrier were not any better. They all instinctively screamed and screamed to vent their fear of death. Vroom. At this critical moment, the helicarrier that had lost its two engines stopped abruptly, accompanied by a tremor that spread throughout the entire cabin. It didn't descend even 1 meter. It was as if time had stopped. The helicarrier hovered about 500 meters above the ground, casting a large shadow on the forest and lake below. It caused a flock of birds to fly into the blue sky in a panic. The New York civilians who happened to be nearby saw this scene and could not help but sit on the ground. They held their breaths and looked at the dark and cold steel military fortress in the sky in horror. The weightlessness and tremor stopped at the same time. The helicarrier maintained its tilt and returned to its original calm state. The main cockpit fell into silence. A few seconds later, the helicarrier stopped? What's going on? Oh my God, everyone is still alive. The survivors on the aircraft carrier looked around and couldn't hide their surprise as they whispered to each other. Director Fry confirmed that the helicarrier was no longer falling. He breathed a sigh of relief and looked in the direction of Agent Hill. Could it be that the 2 engines have been restarted? No. Hill stopped operating the virtual keyboard and looked at the projection screen in front of him that was still being repaired. Tap tap. Steve let go of the iron door handle and landed steadily on the ground. He put down Thor and Eddie. He dialed the communicator and asked in a deep voice, "Sam, did you see that? What's going on?" "Captain, in fact, I'm not too sure either." Sam spread his 3 to 4 meters long steel wings and circled around the helicarrier. He then dived to the bottom and frowned as he looked at the helicarrier that had stopped falling. On the side of the helicopter carrier that was tilted downwards, the 2 engine vortexes had yet to be restarted. Only the 2 engines on the other side were dragging it. However, at this moment, the bottom of the helicopter carrier seemed to have been injected with a third party's power, allowing the heavily damaged aircraft carrier to hover steadily in the air. Sam flew to the bottom of the aircraft carrier. Soon he seemed to have discovered something. His tanned face was shocked, and an expression of disbelief appeared on his face. "Oh my God! Did you find anything, Sam?" Steve asked anxiously when he heard the exclamation from the other end of the communicator. "It's Caesar," Sam replied with a trembling voice. "Caesar, did you see Caesar? Where is he now?" Steve asked. Sam swallowed hard and said with a dry mouth, "He is carrying the helicarrier you are on." "What are you talking about?" Steve suspected that he had misheard. He looked at Natasha, Eddie, and the others beside him, who were also in disbelief. "Captain, it's Caesar. He is carrying the aircraft carrier with both hands and preventing it from falling further." Sam shouted excitedly. He hovered below the aircraft carrier and looked up at the extremely short figure at the bottom of the aircraft carrier. The body of a young child, to the helicarrier, was like an ant to an elephant. But now, the insignificant ant was carrying the elephant on his shoulders. He was standing in the sky. Caesar's body was almost completely sunk into the bottom shell, but his hands were still strong enough to support the helicarrier, pushing it up with indescribable superhuman strength. With the sun rising from the horizon as the background, his blonde hair became extremely bright and dazzling. Sam stared blankly. This extraordinary scene of turning the tide was deeply engraved in his mind. He would probably never forget it. "Rise." Caesar's small face was extremely serious. The blood in his body was boiling and flowing like lava. His body was still in the stage of exerting force. His arms, left shoulder, and even his small head were all holding up the hard shell of the helicarrier, rapidly converting the solar energy into infinite power. Under the irrigation of superhuman strength, the helicarrier was lifted up little by little. Caesar tried his best to carry the helicarrier, sweat dripping down, and flew steadily into the blue sky with difficulty. In the main pilot's hall, after hearing Sam's feedback and seeing the helicarrier rising, Steve breathed a sigh of relief and sat on the floor next to the unconscious Thor. Steve smiled and whispered, "I knew it. That guy always does what he says." "Yeah, no matter when, he always does something shocking and gives us a big fright." Natasha nodded in agreement. Eddie was confused. He looked at Steve and Natasha. "What are you talking about?" Steve and Natasha looked at each other, smiled, and waved their hands at the same time. "Nothing." Director Fry quickly said to Hill, "Hill, take this opportunity quick." "Of course I know." Hill replied and put his hands on the virtual keyboard. His 5 fingers flicked quickly, and the projection screen showed a progress bar that was almost full. "The first and second engines are rebooting. 3, 2, 1 system rebooting complete." This prompt sound was like the sound of nature, and it sounded in the main pilot's hall. Outside, Sam looked up and saw the first and second engines at the bottom of the helicarrier. The giant windmill began to rotate slowly, and the strong driving force caused the helicarrier to tilt to one side and rise quickly. At this point, the helicarrier returned to normal navigation. Caesar's hands were still at the bottom of the helicarrier. It was not until the helicarrier was 1,000 meters above the ground that he released his hands with relief. It's over. The power faded, and the conversion of solar energy in his body suddenly stopped. Although there was still energy left, the fatigue of his body had long surpassed his endurance limit. He had been relying entirely on his willpower to hold on until now. As soon as Caesar closed his eyes, he completely fainted. His body, which was originally full of vitality, suddenly became like a rock, falling straight down from the sky. Sam, the engines have been repaired. You and Caesar come to the main pilot's hall. In the hall, Steve said to the communicator. Sam hurriedly responded, I'm afraid not yet. What's wrong? Steve asked in surprise. He's falling. Caesar is falling. At the same time, Sam folded his wings inwards, and his arms were also close to his body to reduce the air resistance and accelerate his dive, chasing after Caesar, who was unconsciously free-falling. They were getting close. Sam stretched out his hands and hugged Caesar. The steel wings on his back spread out, and with the hum of the mechanical engine, he fiercely flapped and soared into the sky. Chapter 443. After ascending and maintaining an altitude of 5,000 meters, the helicarrier finally returned to normal navigation. After the baptism of the previous fierce battle, whether it was the surface of the helicarrier's shell or inside the cabin, there were tragic traces of a mess. The helicarrier's shell and deck were cracked in many places, and there were extremely serious gaps. In order to ensure that there would be no more accidents, the staff could only use iron plates to repair the holes in an emergency. This was like mending a few conspicuous ragged patches on a brand new gorgeous dress. The third engine vortex was still emitting wisps of black smoke, making caw-caw noises. Inside the helicarrier, the staff had begun to clean up the passage and the cabin, take away the bodies and the wounded, and put the instruments, tables and chairs back to their original places. However, many people were still in a trance, and their faces were stiff and expressionless. Obviously, they had not yet reacted to the surprise attack just now. The scene could only be described with one word: tragic. It was too tragic. In the main pilot's hall, under the organization of Director Fry and Agent Hill, some of the staff were reorganized into a pilot team to monitor the damaged helicarrier indiscriminately and count the casualties and damage caused by the attack. Captain America Steve, Black Widow Natasha, and Hawkeye Barton sat side by side on a step in the hall, looking at the post-war repair site below in a trance. We've lost this round. Steve lowered his chin with both hands, and his handsome young face was solemn. He sighed softly and said, We lost completely. Sure enough, we can't underestimate Loki from the alien divine realm. He is a very difficult guy to deal with. Natasha said with emotion, Captain, the previous war was better, right? There were no scheming spies lurking, no gifted aliens involved, and no flying magic hammers. It's hard to say. Steve shook his head and said, I was too careless this time. I used to rely on that person and follow his shadow, but now I can only grope forward step by step. Natasha lowered her head and whispered, Me too. If he always followed behind that person, his body and mind would inevitably slacken, and he would never be able to become a hero who could take charge alone. Director Fry walked over from a distance. He glanced at Steve and the other two who were still immersed in their failure and lightly said, In the previous raid, 26 agents of SILD were killed and many more were injured. During this, Agent Ko-sen did not have the time to perform first aid and died. He's dead. Director Frey's tone became unusually heavy. Agent Coulson. He was one of the veteran agents who assisted Fry in creating the Avengers. As long as one was a member of the Avengers, there was probably no one who did not know him. Damn it. Bart blamed himself and slammed his fist on the floor. Steve was silent, not knowing what to say. What about young Master Caesar? Is he all right? Natasha asked concernedly. Fry nodded and said, Caesar is fine. He's just still unconscious. In the battle just now, he has exceeded his body's limit and can no longer participate in the next battle. As long as he's fine. Natasha lowered her head in shame. Just now they did not help at all. Director Fry looked at Steve and the other two who were silent. He suddenly took a deep breath and shouted, You three are the top agents and super soldiers on Earth. Don't tell me you're going to give up after encountering such a small setback? Don't forget who you are. Steve and the other two trembled. Of course we didn't forget, we are the Avengers. Steve clenched his fists and slowly stood up from the stairs. At the same time, Natasha and Barton also stood up and stood on the left and right of the captain. That's right. Director Fry showed a gratified expression and said with a dark and serious face, "Don't think about backing down. Even if you have to bite the bullet, you have to fight for me. Otherwise, how can you be worthy of the sacrifice of those agents?" Indeed, no one can be sacrificed anymore. Natasha nodded in agreement. Barton said coldly, "I'll shoot my arrow on that bastard's head." Then now, Director Fry was about to say something, but the door of the driver's room suddenly opened. Thor, wearing a red cloak and silver armor, walked into the main driver's room while rubbing his messy blonde hair. He glanced at everyone and said, "Hey, did anyone see my hammer?" "Saul, you're finally awake." Natasha let out a sigh of relief and blinked. "Can't you use summoning spells?" "That's why it's strange. I can't summon my hammer." Thor waved his hand and anxiously walked around the hall. He glanced around and didn't remember that he was almost killed just now. He regarded Thor's hammer as more important than his own life. "I know where your hammer is." Steve stepped forward and patted Thor's shoulder to comfort him. "My shield should be there too." "Is that so? That's great. By the way, where's my brother Loki?" Saul first expressed his gratitude, then he looked around and said in hindsight, "This insensitive reflex arc." Everyone in the hall was speechless. This funny scene just eliminated the atmosphere of depression and sadness that had accumulated before. Steve said in a deep voice, "Loki has escaped. He must be in the new building of Stark Industries in downtown New York. He wants to use the nuclear reaction energy there to activate the universal magic and open a portal for his alien legion. There's no time to lose, we must set off immediately." Natasha slightly tidied up her leather clothes and patted the dust off her body. Suddenly she asked in surprise, "Wait, where's Eddie? Where did he go?" "Sam just happened to walk into the driver's room and met with everyone." He replied, "Eddie?" "He said that he must find the poison, so he has already left in a fighter." "Then let's also take a fighter and set off for New York City immediately." With Steve as Captain America taking the lead, Thor, Black Widow Natasha, Hawkeye Barton, and Falcon Sam followed closely behind and left the main driver's room. 5 minutes later, a black fighter took off from a helicarrier. Its wings cut through the clouds, and its engine roared as it accelerated to the central city of New York dozens of kilometers away. Director Fry stood by the floor-to-ceiling window of the main driver's room, watching the black fighter disappear at the end of his line of sight. No one knew what he was thinking. Agent Hill suddenly walked up from behind him and whispered something into his ear. "Okay, I got it." Director Fry nodded majestically. He turned and left the driver's room alone. After passing through several long passages, he finally came to a hidden cabin. He reached out and pressed the detector next to the door. After confirming with his fingerprints and pupils, the door opened with a click. Director Fry stepped in and saw a table in the middle of the large room. There were enough hot dishes for 10 people on the table. Caesar was sitting on a chair. He was so hungry that his head was almost buried on the table. He was devouring the high-nutrition food on the plate at a superhuman speed. Director Fry closed the door behind him and sat on the chair directly opposite him. He said, "They have set off. Everything is as you expected, Caesar." "Very good, that's right." Chapter 444. Caesar was smiling, but Fry couldn't smile at all. "I still can't understand." Fry put his hands on the table and got up slightly. He looked straight at Caesar and asked in a deep voice, "Caesar, why? You already knew Loki's intention, but you didn't stop his plan first. Instead, you let him go according to your own script. Next, we may not only have to deal with Loki but also an alien army that can conquer Earth." Caesar smiled and didn't answer. He continued to pick up a roasted chicken leg as big as his arm, opened his mouth and stuffed it directly into his mouth. His cheeks bulged exaggeratedly. "That's right. When Loki invaded Earth and took away the Tesseract, Caesar knew all his plans. After all, he was the man who had read the script. If he even forgot the far-reaching New York War of the Avengers, it would be too shameful for him as a transmigrator. Caesar not only knew Loki's plan early on, but he also saw the psychic staff's manipulation of the toxin soul at the door of the church. Why did Loki still succeed when he knew everything? This was something that Fry, who knew it later, didn't understand. "Hurry up and explain." Director Frey's face was cold and stern. He suddenly realized that he was also one of the chess pieces. And the mastermind was sitting in front of him, a child who looked only 4 or 5 years old. Caesar reluctantly put down half of the chicken leg, chewing the meat in his mouth, and said vaguely, "Didn't I ask you to meet the president a long time ago and apply for emergency evacuation of the people living in the downtown area of New York? Now New York is basically an empty city. What's there to worry about?" "That's not the point. We could have directly arrested or killed Loki before he did it. There's no need for us to come to this point." Fry couldn't help but hit the table. He suddenly frowned and looked at the calm Caesar. "So that's how it is. You have long wanted to use the whole New York as a large battlefield to face the alien army." "That's right. I'll reward you with half a drumstick." Caesar chuckled and handed over the oily chicken drumstick. There was still a row of teeth marks on it. Fry was silent. Sitting on the chair, he crossed his arms and narrowed his eyes. "You've seen through Loki's plan in advance, but you've only been preparing for the war in secret. On the surface you're still following his plan. Is the upcoming alien war a necessary part of your counterplan?" "Yes," Caesar admitted directly. "Nonsense." Fry slammed his palm on the table and said coldly with anger, "Once the alien army enters New York, the war will officially begin. Even if New York has been emptied of residents, it will still be an unforgettable loss and disaster. If we are unable to control the situation and achieve victory in the end, Earth is likely to be destroyed." Caesar's small face was incomparably calm. His tone became firm as he said indifferently, "That's why I asked you to inform the military in advance and set up an elite armed force in New York City. Family Cal and Stark Industries have also been prepared for war." He had been waiting for this war for a long time. This was also the reason why the original Kale had created a clone of Superman. Both of them were silent with their own thoughts, so much so that the cabin fell into an oppressive silence. Fry kept looking at Caesar. He placed his hand on the table and tapped his finger lightly. Suddenly he said, "Give me a reason. Why didn't you prevent this war from happening in advance?" "Because there's no way to stop it and there's no need to stop it." Caesar spread his hands and said to Fry, "You should know very well that there are many other forces outside Earth, and the Cosmic Origin Stone is a supreme treasure that some high-dimensional forces are crazily fighting over. Due to the exposure of the Cosmic Origin Stone on Earth, even if we stop Loki today, there will be more extraterrestrial forces descending in the future." Fry said thoughtfully, "So you want to reverse the situation and use New York as the home ground to take the initiative to welcome the first alien invasion." This was undoubtedly the action of a madman. One must know that the worst result could be that Earth would be doomed eternally. Caesar nodded and said, "I've already figured out Loki's strength. Without the Spirit Scepter he is no threat at all. If we can't even defeat part of the extraterrestrial army led by Loki, then how will we deal with the more powerful extraterrestrial forces in the future? If we can achieve victory in this war, we are destined to be recorded in history. Not only can we take the opportunity to improve our technological level and reduce the gap between us and the enemy, but we can also sound the alarm to all humans on Earth that the future danger will come from beyond the heavens." Caesar's eyes were as bright as gems. His eyes were filled with determination and determination. This was a hurdle that New York and even Earth had to cross over. Only by crossing over would there be a future. Caesar's vision was not limited to the present, but extended to the direction of the future for more than 10 years. "I understand." Fry sighed. What would come would come. This alien war was inevitable. At this time, Fry remembered that a few years ago, when Kale had just returned from space, he did not hide the matter of the aliens. Instead, he told the world through the media. At that time he could not understand, but now he understood. It was inevitable to cause panic, but only by knowing the potential enemy could they better deal with it. And today the alien enemy had really come. After this war, everything would be overturned, all cognition and rules. Earth, which had been in a dark forest and had been isolated from other civilizations, was about to make its first appearance in the universe and fire the first shot. "Kale, we must win this war. And we must win beautifully." Fry stood up, turned around and walked to the door saying, "We will do our best no matter the cost." After Fry left, only Caesar was left in the closed cabin. "Full force, ha!" Caesar muttered to himself. His small hand grabbed the meat on the table and stuffed it into his mouth. Energy could be replenished through various channels, but hunger could not be eliminated. He took advantage of the current time to let his body have a good rest. At this time in New York City, it was noon, and the usually bustling commercial streets were now empty. Only some screens in some commercial buildings were playing advertisements. It was empty like a dead city. Loki did not care so much. He directly took a fighter and arrived at the new Stark Industries building. The scientists and agents under his control had already built a transmission device on the balcony of the 100-meter-high top floor with the Tesseract and some material parts. The transmission device was connected to several transport cables and was connected to the nuclear reactor inside the building to absorb enough high-particle energy. Lord Loki, it's done. Now we're waiting for your order. The old scientist from SHELD reported humbly and excitedly to Loki, his eyes flashing with dark light. Very good. Loki smiled evilly. He stood by the railing of the balcony and looked down at most of New York City. He waved his hands like a king. Then what are we waiting for? Let's begin. Open the portal for me. Chapter 445. In the heart of New York City in the new Stark Industries building. After Loki gave the order, the old scientist came to the instrument table with a smile on his face. He placed his 5 fingers on the virtual keyboard and quickly operated it. As he operated the startup system, the nuclear reactor inside the building under the rooftop, the energy converter with a height of 10 meters and a radius of 6 meters immediately started operating at a high speed. The energy that was enough to support half of the city flowed through several cables that had already been installed and poured into the instrument that stabilized the Tesseract. Virum. The Tesseract placed in the middle of the instrument glowed with a bright blue light as if it had been stimulated by the abundant energy. It's almost done. The old scientist showed a fanatical expression. His dark eyes reflected the light of the Tesseract as he pressed the last button without hesitation. Chi. The dazzling blue light shone brightly. Loki, who was next to him, didn't notice that a small crack suddenly appeared on the surface of the square universal magic. The power of the primordial stone inside overflowed and exploded from the top of the transmission instrument like an antenna, converging into a dark blue energy beam that blasted into the sky. The moment the energy beam hit the sky thousands of meters above, a small space gap appeared in the sky. The mysterious and unknown star map could be vaguely seen in the sky of New York City. As the space energy raged, the gap in the sky continued to expand. In less than 10 seconds, the gap with a radius of 1 meter had evolved into a space hole with a radius of 10 meters, and it continued to expand. Through the wormhole-like space hole, one could see that on the other side was the dimly lit outer space. A few giant interstellar battleships were floating in the middle of it. Seeing the opening of the portal, the alien army that had been waiting for a long time suddenly moved like locusts. They either drove small mechanical shuttles or large Quinjets and entered New York City through the space hole. Ha! Come on, my invincible army. Take over this barren planet for me. Loki looked up at the sky, opened his hands and closed his eyes, laughing madly against the strong wind. He didn't look like he was going to war. Instead, he looked like he was enjoying himself. Do you see, Father? One day you will be proud of me. Loki thought for no reason. In the outer city of New York, about a kilometer in the sky, the black fighter jet with the SHLD logo slowly descended and revealed itself from stealth mode. Then, what's going on? Natasha, who was controlling the aircraft, knitted her brows. Through the windshield, she could see countless military helicopters and armed vehicles maintaining order outside New York City. On the main roads outside New York City, there were police cars with sirens on both sides to clear the way. The roads were filled with slow-moving vehicles and pedestrians, all of them heading out of the city in a dense swarm like ants migrating. I don't know if it's because I'm an antique. The efficiency of the military and the police is actually so fast? Steve, who was in the front passenger seat, asked in surprise. No. Sam was also surprised. He scratched his head and said, dispersing all the residents of New York City in advance is a huge move that will shock the world. It can't be done without the approval of the White House and the Parliament. Steve was even more surprised. He looked at the few people in the fighter jet who were silent and said in a deep voice, in other words, at least half a day ago, the higher-ups had already predicted that something would happen in New York and took emergency measures? Loki had just been caught half a day ago. I wonder who it is. Such a bold proposal. If nothing happened in New York, wouldn't he have to bear a mountain of infamy? Sam lamented. No need. Barton, who had been silent, suddenly pointed to the front. Everyone looked in the direction he was pointing and gasped in unison. Even in the outer city of New York, they could clearly see a blue beam of light rushing into the sky, and a huge hole had been torn open in the sky. From the hole, a large number of unknown alien fighter jets rushed out, circled around, and descended into the city below. Loki, he got it. Thor said expressionlessly. With Thor's hammer in hand, he quickly walked to the aft cabin. The alien force that the head of the family mentioned is really here. Natasha swallowed her saliva and grabbed the steering wheel of the fighter jet tightly. Her slender fingers were so tight that her knuckles turned white. Barton took out the bow on his back. His eyes were cold. He had suffered a loss at Loki's hands once, and now he was full of anger waiting to be vented. "Everyone, are you ready?" Steve stood up from his seat, put on the dark blue helmet, and put the 5-star round shield on his left arm again. "At your command, Captain." Natasha and Barton both nodded. "Then let's go. If Loki wants to start a war, then let's do as he wishes." Steve's face was cold and his words were crisp. All verbal speeches were better than direct actions. The alien army that Thanos had entrusted to Loki was an elite soldier from the mechanical forces. These mechanical soldiers were iron-blooded and obedient. They were good at using mechanical fighter jets and laser weapons to launch aggressive attacks. Most of the mechanical soldiers that had just descended from the wormhole were driving small shuttles and wandering back and forth in the sky above the streets. However, they were facing an empty city that had long been evacuated. While they were confused about the situation, the windows of many buildings quietly opened. The rocket launchers placed in the rooms were aimed at the alien shuttles wandering outside the streets. At this moment, inside a building in the center of New York, Colonel Rhodes, who was the person in charge of the military operation, had already put on the war machine that Tani had tailor-made for him, the unpainted steel armor improved from Mark III. He had also appropriately added a powerful back shell. Colonel Rhodes aimed his hand cannon at the alien shuttles wandering back and forth outside the window. He ordered into the walkie-talkie, 3, 2, 1, fire. Bang, bang, bang. Almost at the same time, the streets of the center of New York were filled with the sound of cannons. The targets were the alien shuttles that had just arrived on Earth. The first batch of patrolling mechanical soldiers was caught off guard by the human army lurking in the empty city. Many shuttles were immediately destroyed in mid-air on the streets. The explosion waves and debris fell down like rain. This scene was as spectacular as fireworks. Charge! Expel them! After the sound of cannons rang out, fully equipped U.S. soldiers rushed out of many buildings. They were armed with rifles, firearms, and rocket launchers, shooting indiscriminately at the shuttles and aliens that had descended on the streets. Boom, boom, boom. In some underground garages, along with the sound of earthquakes, armed tanks drove out aggressively. The muzzles of the tanks could not stop shooting into the sky. The silver war machine broke out of the window. The engine roared and pushed, allowing him to shuttle nimbly between the streets. The hand cannons in his left and right hands shot down the shuttles. The human army has been lurking in the city for a long time? Loki, who was standing on the top floor of the Stark building, looked down and saw the reversal of the situation. The corners of his mouth curled up quietly. He smiled evilly and said, "Just in time. I was afraid that you would hide and spend time looking for you." "Go." Loki waved his hand. From the wormhole in the sky, mechanical shuttles and Quinjets swept down in an overwhelming manner. Chapter 446. In the center of New York City. At this time, with the energy beam that shot straight to the sky as the center, there was no distinction between the sky and the land. The alien mechanical army led by the evil god Loki and the elite army led by the U.S. Colonel Rhodes, the two forces officially collided with each other. In just a few seconds, the entire New York City turned into a bloody battlefield. Lasers and artillery shells intertwined back and forth, and smoke and artillery fire lingered in every corner. The alien mechanical army descended from the wormhole that caused the sky to change. The elite army of the U.S. Empire, on the other hand, did not show any signs of weakness as they faced the enemy from the ground streets of New York. This extremely spectacular and tragic scene was as if the sky and the earth were engaged in a life-and-death battle. Oh my God! Run! The aliens are really here. The pedestrians who were still blocking the edge of the outer city of New York saw the city center behind them. The sky seemed to be burning fiercely, and the earth was thundering non-stop. They could not help but speed up their escape in horror. They were about to gather into a torrent of people that even the police could not maintain order. Buzz! At this moment, a black fighter jet marked with the logo as Hill flew hundreds of meters in the air, against the direction of the crowd's evacuation, alone and firmly flew toward the city center where the war had already begun. Look! Someone in the crowd shouted, and then countless people raised their heads and looked forward. They could see countless black spots that looked like bees appearing in the sky outside the city. The black dots continued to expand. When they got closer, they could see that they were helicopters and fighter jets. They flew toward the battlefield without hesitation. This confirmed what Director Fry had said to Caesar earlier: "I will do my best at all costs." In the city center, the elite army led by Colonel Rhodes had indeed caught the alien army off guard. However, when the alien army reacted and concentrated their firepower to fight, the gap between the technological weapons of the two sides was vividly reflected. The standard weapons of the alien mechanical army were all laser beam energy. The power could easily penetrate the armored tanks on Earth, which were known as the Land Overlord. In addition, the mechanical invaders were crazy and did not die. Their numbers were astonishing and their attacks were rampant like locusts. They suppressed the elite army of the U.S. Empire to an absolute disadvantage. "Oh, come on, alien bastard." Colonel Rhodes, who was also known as the War Machine, started his engine and floated in mid-air. He was surrounded by several small shuttles and could only rely on flying and moving constantly. While dodging the laser beams, his left and right hands were constantly switching between firing hand cannons. However, there were simply too many extraterrestrial invaders. They surrounded him tightly and gradually narrowed the encirclement amidst the intense exchange of fire. The pressure from the enemy almost made Rhodes breathless. Wearing the War Machine armor, he scanned his surroundings and looked at the alien shuttles that were closing in on him. Suddenly, he activated a device on his wrists and spun his hands. "Have a taste of this." The small shuttles and the alien invaders swarmed toward the War Machine. The moment they were about to drown him, two scorching red lasers shot out. As the lasers swept left and right, the alien invaders and the small shuttles within a 10-meter radius were all cut into pieces and fell to the ground. Even Rhodes himself did not expect that the one-time emergency weapon that Tani had configured for him a few years ago would be so powerful. He floated in the air in a daze, looking at the enemies around him that had been wiped out. Then he looked at the laser device on his wrist that had been destroyed. He could not help but blurt out, "Tani, I love you." Soon Rhodes could not be happy anymore. A dark cloud-like shadow shrouded him. The War Machine looked up and his pupils suddenly shrank in surprise. A large alien battleship was approaching. The alien battleship was the size of a normal aircraft carrier. Its shape was similar to a centipede. Under the sun, it reflected a faint cold steel light. It swam in the sky and pressed down on the War Machine like a small mountain. Countless muzzles adjusted their angles and aimed at the War Machine. F***CK. The gap between their weapons was too big. The War Machine did not even have the thought of fighting back. He turned around and accelerated. The alien battleship chased after them relentlessly, rampaging through the streets. Skyscrapers were easily knocked down by it and they collapsed to the ground. The War Machine was in front, and the Quinjet was behind. The distance between the two was constantly shrinking. At this critical moment, a missile with a tail flame behind it came from the side and directly hit the head of the Quinjet. Billowing smoke and shockwaves erupted. "This is..." The War Machine suddenly stopped in the air and looked in the direction where the missile came from. He saw a black fighter jet slowly descending. When it was still 10 meters above the ground, the rear cabin of the fighter jet had already opened, and 3 figures nimbly jumped out from it. "What's the situation now?" A tall and strong blond young man with a round shield in his hand asked. He had a 5-star badge on his chest. "You're not too late, are you?" The black man, who had extended a pair of steel wings and was also propelled by the engine, said faintly as he hovered in the air with 2 pistols in his hands. The third black-haired young man did not speak. He just indifferently took out an arrow and put it on the bowstring of the bow in his left hand. Seeing the familiar faces, the War Machine almost burst into tears. "Captain, you're finally here. Since the war has begun, then let's go." Steve shouted, his eyes full of determination. "Yes, sir." Everyone responded in unison. At this moment, someone was still on the way to the battlefield. The New York War. This is really spectacular. Seeing it in the movies is far better than experiencing it in person. At the border of the central area of New York, Caesar flew at a low speed in the air. His superhuman vision could clearly see the fierce city battlefield more than 10 kilometers away. He could also see the flashing lightning. Obviously, even Thor had officially joined the battle. To catch the bandits, first catch the ringleader. Should I go find Loki now and beat him up? Caesar touched his chin. While he was thinking, suddenly from the street not far away, he sensed some kind of strange energy wave. This feeling is... Caesar opened his eyes in surprise. Bricker Street, on the roof of a house A177. This place was shrouded in a fog-like camouflage and a layer of magical shield, blocking the alien mechanical soldiers who wanted to invade. A bald woman in a yellow robe stood on the roof of the building with her hands behind her back. Her left wrist glowed with a circle of Dharma seals. As she kept waving her left hand, the shells bombarding the protective shield of the house were deflected in advance. Ta! Light footsteps sounded behind her. The bald woman looked back and saw a blonde child about 5 years old smiling at her. Long time no see, Ancient One. Alpha Centauri was not surprised at all. There was a hint of helplessness in his eyes. Yeah, long time no see, General Kale. Chapter 447. General Kale. I haven't heard this name for a long time. It's been 70 or 80 years since the end of World War II. Caesar sighed. His body ignored gravity and floated up from the ground. His sapphire-like eyes looked at Alpha Centauri and he asked in surprise, "How did you recognize me so quickly?" Ancient One put his hands behind his back and without hiding anything he directly explained, "All creatures have a unique soul from the beginning of their birth, and we, the Guardian Sorcerer, have a pair of eyes that can see the soul clearly. So that's how it is." Caesar nodded approvingly. His Superman doppelganger was created by splitting his soul. Naturally, he believed in the mysterious and unpredictable soul. However, believing in it was one thing. If one wanted to touch the realm of the soul, there was a gap between heaven and earth. I don't know what level of ability card this old woman has after practicing magic for hundreds of years. I really want to take a good look. Caesar looked at the Ancient One who was standing in front of him, less than 3 meters away. He was itching to borrow the card drawing system from his main body. The idea of drawing the ability card from the Ancient One had persisted for decades. Unfortunately, when his main body was here, he couldn't find the Ancient One anywhere. His main body wasn't here, but his doppelganger accidentally found it. When Caesar thought of this, he was like a child who had lost his candy, and his ears drooped dejectedly. The Ancient One didn't think that Caesar was still thinking about her. She turned her back to Caesar and stood by the railing with her hands behind her back. She calmly looked at the extremely chaotic and tragic New York battlefield outside the house's protective net. The Ancient One said in a faint tone, "General Kale. Decades ago when I first saw you in New York, I knew that you were the one and only evil star in the world. You are a person who can affect the world and even the universe dimension by yourself." That's a bit too much. Who would say that others are evil stars? Caesar helplessly spread out his hands and floated forward, leaning side by side with Ancient One, and also looking at the chaotic battlefield outside. Other alien forces have come to our door to bully us. To put it crudely, they are riding on your head. We can't wait for them to slaughter our loved ones and ravage our world, and then find ways to take revenge. The Ancient One retorted, "You are right, but it's not a foolproof plan. War has never been able to solve the fundamental problems." Caesar smiled and replied with certainty, "A foolproof plan is to always be in awe of the weak and have a powerful strength that is above others." Ancient One was silent. The strong preyed on the weak and the strong were the king. This was the eternal truth of the universe. She naturally couldn't refute it, but she couldn't completely accept it in her heart. It was easy to say that she had the strength to be above others, but she didn't know that there was always someone better than her. Even Alpha Centauri, the guardian of the Earth, didn't dare to say that she had enough strength to protect the Earth from external invasion. However, she had things that others couldn't do, but it didn't mean that the man in front of her couldn't. If it's him, maybe he can really do something that even I can't do. Ancient One thought in his heart, looking sideways at Caesar. He nodded imperceptibly, and the corners of his mouth curled up slightly. "Then I'll wait and see." Caesar laughed casually, "Ancient One, you are not young anymore. If you can't do anything, then retire as soon as possible. Sit in the audience and watch my performance. I will beat up all the villains who dare to come to Earth." Isn't it a bit too much to say that to a lady that she is too old? The Ancient One smiled faintly. She had always been serious, but at this time, there was a hint of ridicule. Decades passed in the blink of an eye. As the guardian of the Earth, Alpha Centauri finally recognized Caesar as Kale. Even if Kale was the biggest variable, she believed that he was the variable that could reverse everything for the better. "Well, I already know the location of the Mage Temple in New York. Next time when I have time, I will come in and play." Caesar eagerly rubbed his palms and looked at the battle in New York outside. The Kryptonian blood in his body that thirsted for battle gradually boiled and he couldn't hold back the urge to join the battle. "Well, you are welcome to the temple." The Ancient One didn't ask him to stay and said faintly, Caesar waved goodbye and was about to fly out of the ancient house when he suddenly turned back and asked the Ancient One, "Are you really not going to do anything this time?" The Ancient One shook her head gently. With the time gem in hand, she had already seen the various endings of the battle in New York. There were a total of 1665 endings, and as long as Caesar was there, it would be a complete victory. What did this mean? It meant that Caesar alone had the terrifying combat power to expel Loki and his alien army out of the country. He alone was enough to end the war, so he directly ruled out all other factors of failure. "Then I will go first." Caesar pouted and flew out of the house. But at this moment, a huge dark green figure suddenly swept over his head at high speed from the street outside to the roof of the New York temple hidden by magic. Caesar, who was flying, stopped in midair and looked back together with the Ancient One. They saw a 2-meter-tall green muscle monster come to the door of the roof and sneakily peek inside. Caesar saw the familiar visitor and widened his eyes in deep surprise. Half an hour ago he was sent flying out of the aircraft carrier along with Toxin. How did he recover so quickly? Hearing the sudden childish voice, Hulk was shocked. When it turned around and saw Caesar, its huge and domineering body suddenly trembled. Excitement and nostalgia flashed in its eyes and it said in human language, "Caesar." Caesar was even more surprised. He looked up and down at Hulk and said in surprise, "Are you Dr. Banner? You have controlled Hulk's state? Is it completely enlightened after being beaten up by me?" Tap tap tap. Hulk did not say a word. It quickly took a few steps forward and clapped its huge hands forward, hugging Caesar in its arms. It used its stiff and rough chin to rub Caesar's soft little face. "What are you doing?" Resisting Hulk's chin, Caesar felt more and more confused. There was no doubt that this was Hulk, but compared to the previous Hulk who could go berserk at any time, this was a completely different person. The Ancient One at the side seemed to see through everything and said softly, "Caesar, he is not the person you know." She paused and continued, "To be more precise, he came from a time and space in the future. In the end, there was still a variable from the future." Chapter 448. New York Battlefield, Stark Industries' new building. The Tesseract was inside the portal device. With the injection of nuclear energy, the cracks on one side of the Tesseract's shell continued to extend, and the residual power of the Tesseract continued to pour into the sky. When the wormhole in the sky expanded to its maximum size, it vaguely formed a space vortex, and the sky seemed to be completely torn apart. The huge gap in the space vortex was enough for the space battleships the size of an aircraft carrier to easily pass through. When the battleships of this top technological civilization were completely thrown into the battlefield below, the armed tanks, military helicopters, and fighter jets that the human army relied on were all met with devastating destruction. On the chaotic street, Steve, who was covered in blood and smoke, once again swung the shield fiercely, smashing the steel head of a mechanical soldier into the ground. He was constantly panting, looking up at the sky, at the Quinjet that was recklessly crashing and bombarding the street, and at the height of 1,000 meters, at the alien armed forces that were rushing out of the space vortex. He couldn't help but shout to Natasha, who was not far away, "Natasha, we need to find a way to close the portal, otherwise these guys will never be able to be killed." "I know." Natasha flicked her bright red hair and looked up at the source of the portal from the top floor of the Stark Industries building. She then looked at the small shuttles that were constantly passing over her head and took a deep breath. "Help me." "Are you sure you want to do this?" Steve glanced at the shuttles that were constantly passing by and quickly understood her idea. He switched his hands to carry the 5-star round shield. "I'm sure it will be very exciting." Natasha licked her dry lips and suddenly accelerated towards Steve. Steve lowered his body and cooperatively used the round shield as a stepping stone. The moment Natasha stepped on the round shield, Steve gave her a push, and Natasha jumped straight up 10 meters, just in time to grab a shuttle that was flying over her head, and disappeared at the end of the street. Steve sighed lightly and said to the communicator, "Someone still needs to block the portal. Don't let the follow-up forces of the alien army continue to enter the New York battlefield unimpeded." "I'll go." Accompanied by a rough and domineering reply in the sky, Thor in silver armor and red cloak, Thor's golden hair was in a mess. He quickly swung Thor's hammer. He rose from the sky, his entire body shivering with sizzling electric sparks as he boldly dashed towards the space whirlpool. As if responding to Thor's call, the sky was covered with dark clouds and thunder rumbled. Thor's hand was on the modern Iron Tower's lightning rod. He raised the Thor's hammer in his hand and struck towards the sky, guiding the lightning in the thunderclouds towards the spatial vortex. At this moment, it was as if the heavens were enraged. Thunder and lightning twisted like snakes to form a web of electricity. The small shuttles that continued to emerge from the vortex, including the Kuan-style battleship, were all destroyed in the sky on the spot. This is the Thor's hammer I'm familiar with. Thor sighed as he looked at the Thor's hammer that was filled with the power of thunder. Previously, for some reason, the energy in the core of the Thor's hammer was depleted, and it was almost unable to maintain the power of the divine artifact. Very good. Steve saw that Thor blocked the portal, but he did not let down his guard. He glanced at the Kuan-style battleship and small shuttles that had descended on the street. We still need to eliminate some of the alien army that arrived in New York. Colonel Rode, are there any follow-up reinforcements from the military? The communicator received Steve's inquiry. While the war machine fired at the alien soldiers, he gritted his teeth and said, "Yes, but it will take some time to deploy them." Is that so? Steve raised his eyebrows. At this moment, on the road behind him, the sound of a motorcycle suddenly came from afar. Steve looked back and saw a dilapidated motorcycle slowly coming from the smoke-filled streets. The one driving the motorcycle was Eddie, who had left alone earlier. Dr. Bana was still sitting on the back seat of the motorcycle. He waved at him and said, "We are not late, right?" "Just in time. Without you two monsters, those things are really difficult to deal with." Steve couldn't help but laugh. He raised his thumb and motioned to the Kuan-style battleship that was flying in the air. "What are you talking about? I am a hero, not a monster." Eddie pouted, patted his chest and said confidently, "Just leave it to us, right, Toxin?" As soon as he said that, black liquid lines appeared on the surface of Eddie's body. They expanded and intertwined, quickly combining into a dark, horny membrane. White, flame-like marks blossomed on his sturdy chest. His white, narrow eyes stared at the warships that were flying here and there while he bared his ferocious, bloody mouth. "Don't steal its limelight, it will be angry." Dr. Bana shrugged and took a step forward. The muscles on his body began to expand and turn green. His shirt and shoes were torn at a speed visible to the naked eye, leaving only a pair of tough pants on his waist. Toxin grinned at the battleships, and Hulk let out a thunderous roar. "You are really finished this time." Steve stepped aside and looked at the alien battleships with some pity. Toxin and Hulk were beaten up by Caesar not long ago, and now they were probably looking for someone to vent their frustrations on. It just so happened that the alien legion bumped into the muzzle. On the other side, on Brick Street, New York, on the rooftop of the temple covered by magic. "He is from the future." The words of Alpha Centauri not only surprised Caesar, but also the future Hulk. The future Hulk quickly let go of Caesar and looked at the Ancient One seriously. He asked in surprise, "Who are you?" "We have never met in the future." The Ancient One smiled faintly and said calmly, "I am the owner of this house. As an uninvited guest, you don't introduce yourself first and you ask who I am?" "I am here to find Dr. Strange." The future Hulk avoided introducing himself and scratched his head awkwardly. Caesar frowned. Logically speaking, Dr. Strange should not have appeared in the current time. And Hulk in front of him not only perfectly controlled his emotions, but also controlled by Dr. Bana's consciousness. He also had a gentle temperament that was far from his rough appearance. Could it be that he really came from the distant future? The Ancient One pointed at the street not far away and said faintly, "Sorry, you are 5 years too early. Strange is now working as a surgeon in a hospital 4 or 5 streets away." "What is your intention here?" the Ancient One continued to ask. The future Hulk did not hesitate and pointed directly at the pendant worn by Alpha Centauri. The Ancient One lowered his head and looked meaningfully at the instrument on his chest that was faintly glowing green. It was the Eye of Agamotto that was guarded by the sorcerers for generations. It was also the supreme instrument that contained the time gem. "And that?" The future Hulk turned sideways and pointed at Caesar. "Me?" Caesar pointed at his nose in surprise. The future Hulk shook his head and stared at him. "No, of course not. It is the thing in your stomach." "My stomach?" Caesar touched his stomach and quickly realized that the future Hulk was referring to the mind gem that he swallowed earlier. Chapter 449. Hulk, who came from the future 5 years in the future, came to the present time to obtain the time gem and the soul gem? This was undoubtedly a fantasy. If he had not seen it with his own eyes, Caesar would not have dared to think about traveling through time. While Caesar was still thinking, the Ancient One had already rejected him. Sorry, I can't give you the gem. The future Hulk was not surprised when he heard this. He clenched his fists and approached the Ancient One step by step with a wild and oppressive aura. He grinned and said, I'm in a hurry. I didn't intend to ask for it from you. Caesar, don't interfere. The future Hulk did not forget to say this to Caesar, who was beside him. Don't worry, I won't interfere. There's no need for that. Caesar crossed his arms and floated in the air as he watched silently. He argued and said, but I have to remind you that it's best not to do that. 5 years later, you still know nothing about power. What? The future Hulk was surprised. He walked to the front of the Ancient One and was about to snatch the Eye of Agamotto. Ancient One shook his head lightly and suddenly moved. The 5 fingers of his left hand were closed into a palm, fast and powerful, slapping on Hulk's rock-solid dark green chest. Although this palm was only the strength of an ordinary person, it contained boundless magical power. The future Hulk was caught off guard and trembled all over. Banna's illusory soul flew out of the tall and burly Hulk's body. Ancient One stretched out another finger and flicked it forward, and Hulk's body, which had fallen backward, floated up and was placed on a sofa in the corner of the rooftop. What the hell is going on? Banna's soul floated in the air. It was transparent under the sunlight and did not leave any shadow. I told you not to fight with her. Caesar sighed softly. The general structure of a soul was similar to a special energy wave. Since he was nourished by natural energy, he could still see Banna's soul. The sorcerers on Earth were proficient in soul magic. Even if you had a strong physique that could withstand missiles or tear tanks apart, the sorcerers could directly ignore the physical defense and damage the soul within the source of life. Furthermore, the person standing in front of them right now was a sorcerer supreme who held a time gem, had specialized in magic for hundreds of years, and had absorbed a portion of the dark dimension's energy. His strength was at its peak. Even in the entire Milky Way, the number of people who could arm wrestle with her could be counted on one hand. Now you can tell us the details, right? The Ancient One looked at Banna's soul and said calmly, Here. Banna's soul floated in the air, looking at Alpha Centauri, then at Caesar, and finally nodded helplessly. Okay. But I can't reveal too much so as not to affect your current time and space, so I can only give you a rough idea. 5 years later, we encountered a powerful force from outer space. In that devastating war, our Earth was completely defeated. Banna had hidden a lot of information. But after listening to a few sentences, Caesar's eyes showed some clear understanding and said, The enemy you are talking about, is it Thanos? Banna's soul was shocked and blurted out, How do you know that name? As soon as he finished speaking, Banna suddenly realized something and hurriedly covered his mouth with both hands. It's really him? That's strange. Caesar frowned. Don't forget, he had just finished watching the Avengers 3 transmigrations in his previous life. But the current real world was different from the original movie. There was his original body Kale, as well as Superman's avatar, and he had seized the opportunity to collect the 3 Infinity Stones. Under such a premise, the future Earth was also defeated by Thanos? Banna didn't expect Caesar to think so much and continued, For some reason, our future 6 Infinity Stones are gone. If we want to reverse everything that has happened and save the people who have been sacrificed, we can only go through time and space and go to several different time and space in batches to collect the 6 Infinity Stones again. Caesar didn't say anything. I see. The Ancient One nodded thoughtfully and soon shook his head. But I still can't give you the time stone. Why? Banna questioned. The Ancient One didn't answer. With a wave of his hand, his magical power constructed a golden stream of light. With a twist of his wrist, 6 Infinity Stones of different colors were simulated and gathered in one of the rings suspended in the golden stream of light. Alpha Centauri said faintly, The Infinity Stones created our current view of time and space. Let alone 2 of them disappearing in the long river of time at the same time, even if one were to leave, it would be an extremely cruel blow to our time and space. She's right. Caesar agreed. Banna thought for a while and quickly responded, No. We're not taking them away, we're just borrowing them. As long as we use up these gems and return to the current time and space, these gems will be equivalent to never leaving and everything will be fine. The Ancient One still shook his head and said, Your theory is limited to theory and there is one more important problem. Only when you succeed can you return the gems smoothly. Banna was speechless and said to himself, But why? Strange Doctor gave the time stone to Thanos of his own accord. What did you say? The Ancient One was suddenly stunned. He gave it up of his own accord? Yes. Maybe he was wrong. Banna nodded. The Ancient One was silent for a moment and whispered, Maybe I was wrong. She gently waved her hand and Hulk's body on the chair floated up and rushed towards Banna's soul. The soul and body combined and restored to their original state. Future Hulk touched his chest and looked up, only to see Ancient One making a gesture with his hands, and the eye of Agamotto he was wearing slowly lit up with a green light, revealing the well-preserved green gem inside the pendant, which was the primordial stone of time. What are you doing? The Future Hulk saw this scene and was a little confused. He didn't know why Alpha Centauri changed his mind so quickly. Alpha Centauri said with certainty, "Strange, he should be the best among us. In the future, his attainments in time magic are destined to far surpass mine. So he must have his reasons for doing that." The Future Hulk solemnly took the time stone and looked at Caesar who had been floating beside him. "What's your decision, Caesar?" "I can give you the Mind Stone." Caesar took a deep breath and looked straight at the Future Hulk. "But I want to know one thing." The Future Hulk said, "Ask away. If I can say it, I will answer you." Caesar narrowed his eyes and asked in a childish but powerful voice, "In your future 5 years later, am I not on Earth?" The Future Hulk was silent. His lips moved and he looked like he wanted to say something but stopped. Okay, you don't have to answer." Caesar interrupted his words, his little face slightly cold. The future him was obviously not there because if he was there, the future time and space would never be in such a desperate situation. Then where did he go? And what about the original Kale? Chapter 450. Caesar could see the urgency of the Future Hulk, so he didn't ask him any more questions. He carefully controlled the movements of his stomach and spat out an orange-yellow gem that looked like a fruit pit on his palm. There were still some gastric juices and saliva on it. The Future Hulk's mouth twitched, but he didn't mind and took the Origin Stone. Now he had 2 Origin Stones. The Future Hulk was also relieved. He carefully protected the Origin Stone with his palm and grinned at Caesar. "Caesar, fortunately we met you here. Otherwise, our people would have to look for you in the New York War. You shouldn't be the only one who came to the present time, right?" Caesar asked. "Yes, Captain Tani and another hero are here. Their main purpose is the Origin Stone in your hands and the Origin Stone of Space." The Future Hulk didn't hide anything and nodded heartily. Origin Stone of Space? Caesar was suddenly stunned. He floated in the air in a daze. "Yes, isn't the Origin Stone of Space in the Rubik's Cube outside? After the New York War, Captain and the others can sneak into the the headquarters and steal it." The Future Hulk said matter-of-factly. Obviously, they had spent a lot of effort to collect detailed information in order to borrow the Origin Stone of Space in the past. Unfortunately, in the future they had missed out on a very important point. "Wrong, you're wrong, very wrong." The Ancient One seemed to know something and shook his head. "What's wrong? What's the problem?" The Future Hulk asked curiously. "It's very simple." Caesar's little face was very serious. He spread his hands and said, "Banna, listen, if you chose to come to the present-time New York for the Origin Stone of Space, then this is undoubtedly a wrong move. The reason is very simple. The Origin Stone of Space is not in the Rubik's Cube." Caesar didn't know what to say anymore. This was 2F*** up. During World War II, his original body took out the Origin Stone of Space from the Rubik's Cube in order to trick the future Thanos. He didn't expect that it would be his own people who fell into the trap. "This, Caesar, is what you said true? The space gem is not in the Rubik's Cube?" Future Hulk widened his eyes in disbelief. "Without a doubt, yes." Caesar nodded and solemnly said, "During World War II, the space gem was secretly taken out of the magic cube by my creator, Kale. Thus, for the past several decades, the magic cube had only been an empty shell left behind by the space gem. Later, after Kale opened the portal, the space gem mysteriously disappeared. Then we can't have obtained the primordial space stone by coming here?" Future Hulk's green face became extremely ugly. One wrong move and the whole game was lost. If he was missing 1 raw stone, it would be useless even if he obtained 5. Future Hulk's forehead began to sweat. He was so nervous that even his strong body was trembling slightly. "I see." Caesar thought for a moment and said in a deep voice, "Banna, take the 2 raw stones in your hands and return to the original spacetime. I'll go find Captain Future and Tani who have descended to the present spacetime and tell them this fact." "Okay." Future Hulk nodded in agreement. He held the 2 raw stones of time and mind in one hand and activated the electronic watch on his left wrist with the other. The watch quickly expanded and extended into a white bodysuit with an astronaut-style helmet, just enough to wrap his tall and burly body. Future Hulk waved goodbye to the two of them and activated the button in his hand. His body shrank in the blink of an eye and disappeared from the rooftop with a flicker. "I'll leave everything to you, Caesar." After he left, his voice lingered in the same place. Caesar floated in the air and fell into deep thought. The Ancient One's voice came from behind him. "What are you going to do?" "What else can I do, whether it's the present spacetime or the future spacetime? Someone has to clean up their mess." Caesar sighed helplessly. He looked like a 5-year-old child, but his tone and words were more mature and reliable than anyone else. "Then you can go. Whether it's the present or the future, this world needs your existence." Ancient One turned his back to him and came to the side of the railing. He looked down at the New York City outside and said lightly, "The war is finally coming to an end." "Yes, but a new war will come soon." After Caesar bid farewell to Alpha Centauri, he flew out of the New York sanctum. Due to the delay caused by Future Hulk, the New York war outside had come to an end. This was a matter of course, and it was not much different from what Caesar had expected. Although the original Kale, Iron Man Tani, and his Superman avatar were missing, the New York war still had the 3 top combatants, Thor, Hulk, and Toxin. With the intervention of the military and SHELD forces, as well as the family cow forces hidden in the darkness of the town, evil god Loki with only an alien army was obviously not enough. However, as the center of the war, New York City still paid an unimaginably heavy price. It was already afternoon. Caesar was flying slowly at an altitude of several hundred meters. When he looked up, the spatial vortex in the sky had already disappeared. However, there were still streaks of blood-colored sunset glow and lingering dark clouds in the sky. Caesar looked down. The once bustling and beautiful economic capital was now in ruins. Corpses of alien robots and military soldiers were everywhere. Heavily damaged tanks, helicopters, fighter jets, shuttles, and alien battleships were all over the place. The wreckage was mixed with the collapsed buildings. After the war swept through the modern town, it was already a doomsday scene. In some places, the fires had not subsided, and the unpleasant smell of gunpowder drifted into the bloody sky. Caesar suddenly saw an acquaintance and could not help but lower his altitude. Colonel Road was still wearing the broken mechanical armor. He took off his helmet and held it in his hand. His dark face was in a mess. He stood high on a pile of ruins and commanded the military personnel who came to reinforce him. The focus was on rescuing and settling the wounded and confirming whether there were other aliens hiding. "Road." Road was startled when he heard the childish call from above. When he looked up and saw that it was Caesar, he immediately revealed a row of white teeth. "Caesar, why are you only here now? The war is over. It's a pity you didn't see it. Loki was beaten up so badly by Hulk and Eddie." "Something delayed me," Caesar said evasively. "Where are the members of the Avengers? And the Tesseract?" Road pointed to the east and smiled. SHELD's headquarters is not destroyed yet. The captain and the others have just retreated there. Loki and the Tesseract have also been taken care of. "Okay, I got it." Caesar did not delay. After knowing the location, he immediately accelerated on the spot, leaving behind circles of white air, and took off at supersonic speed. Soon, he completely disappeared from the street. "The war is over. Is there anything else important?" Rhodes scratched his head and did not think too much about it. He returned to the tedious post-war affairs. "You're tuning in to the Han Lee's Wuxia Chronicles YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.